She was dancing in his kitchen at midnight when he first saw her. Not performing, not aware. Just moving hips, swaying to a radio, turned so low it barely disturbed the air. Her sock-covered feet sliding across the cold tile floor, eyes closed, face tilted slightly upward like she was listening to something only she could hear. Ji-Wook stood motionless in the hallway shadows and watched. He had crossed 3 continents, building an empire that made grown men lower their eyes when he entered a room. He had buried his wife. He had watched his 7-year-old daughter stop laughing for 4 months. He had signed documents, made threats, dissolved problems with a quietness that frightened people more than shouting ever could. None of it had given him a single moment that felt like this. If you've ever lost someone and had to keep living, anyway, keep the bills paid, keep the schedule running, keep the face intact, then you already understand exactly what Ji-Wook felt, standing in that dark hallway. That particular exhaustion that has nothing to do with sleep. Don't let this story pass you by. Subscribe to the channel and follow every part to the end, because what happens next between these 2 people is something you won't see coming. Hit like and drop your city and country in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels. The states sat above the coastline, like something that had been placed there, deliberately too perfect, too removed, built by someone who understood that distance from other people was itself a form of power. Mist came in most mornings off the Pacific and softened the edges of everything. The grounds were immaculate. The security cameras were invisible if you didn't know where to look, and most people didn't. Inside, the rooms were large and expensive and quiet in the way that houses become quiet when the person who made them feel like home is no longer there. Yirin Han had made that house feel like home. Ji-Wook knew this the way he knew a great many things too late and too clearly. Imani Bellrose had been hired 11 months ago after 3 previous nanny candidates failed to last more than 2 weeks with Sena. The first had been technically perfect and emotionally absent in a way the child sensed before Ji-Wook did. The second had been warm but overwhelmed by the household's unusual security requirements. The third had quit after a single week without giving a specific reason, though Ji-Wook's head of household security, Kang Moo-ji, had later determined she'd simply been frightened by the armed staff. That was a reasonable response. Most people were frightened by the armed staff. Ji-Wook had long since stopped noticing them. Imani had arrived with 2 suitcases, a canvas tote bag heavy with books, and the kind of calm that suggested she had already assessed the situation and decided she could manage it. She was 35, broad-shouldered, full-figured in a way that made the household staff assume she would be soft-spoken and deferential. She was soft-spoken, she was not deferential. On her second morning, she had quietly rearranged Sena's entire daily schedule without consulting anyone, then presented Ji-Wook with a handwritten explanation of her reasoning at dinner. Not an apology, an explanation. She had looked him directly in the eye while he read it, which almost no one in his professional life bothered to do anymore. He had approved the new schedule without changes. Sena had begun eating breakfast again within 2 weeks. Whatever method Imani used and Ji-Wook had genuinely tried to identify it, it was nothing he could name. She didn't perform warmth. She didn't deploy cheerfulness as a strategy. She simply existed near Sena with a consistency that the child seemed to recognize as something reliable, and gradually, carefully, Sena had begun to unfold around her the way living things unfold when the conditions are finally right. By month 3, Sena was laughing again. Ji-Wook had stood outside his daughter's bedroom door one evening and listened to that laugh, the real one. A sound like tripped over itself, and the feeling that moved through him had been so large and so tangled with grief and gratitude that he had needed to walk away before he could trust his face. He had not thanked Imani directly. He had not known how to do it without revealing more of himself than he intended. This was, as it turned out, already a pattern. He first noticed the dancing on a Tuesday night in November. He had come downstairs at 12:40 in the morning because he could not sleep and had not been sleeping properly in weeks. The insomnia had been with him since Yirin's death, not every night, but often enough that he had stopped fighting it and simply waited it out, usually in his office reviewing documents or standing at the window watching the security perimeter below. That night he had wanted water. A simple thing. He had come down the back staircase in bare feet and a dark pullover and stopped in the hallway when he heard the radio. The kitchen light was on the warm overhead one, not the bright functional one, and through the partially open door he could see her. Imani Bellrose, Sena's nanny and employee. She was dancing alone in his kitchen at 12:40 in the morning, wearing socks and what appeared to be an oversized university sweatshirt, moving with the kind of ease that belonged entirely to a person who believed themselves completely alone. There was nothing performed about it. Her eyes were closed. One hand held a glass of water loosely at her side. Her hips found the rhythm of something playing so quietly. Ji-Wook had to hold his breath to hear it at all. He stood there for 11 minutes, he counted later, which told him something about himself he didn't particularly want to know. When he finally turned and went back upstairs without the water, he had not fully understood what he was feeling. Only that the tightness in his chest that had been constant for nearly a year had for those 11 minutes loosened slightly. Not disappeared, not healed, simply loosened the way a fist opens when a person stops consciously gripping. He told himself he would not come downstairs again. He came downstairs the next night, and the one after that. By the end of the first week, Ji-Wook had established a quiet, shameful routine that he would not have admitted to anyone alive. Shortly after midnight, he would come down the back stairs in the dark and position himself in the hallway outside the kitchen, close enough to see through the gap in the door, far enough to remain invisible. He would stand there for however long Imani danced, sometimes 15 minutes, sometimes 40. Then he would go back upstairs. The insomnia didn't stop, but the grinding quality of it changed. He slept worse in terms of hours, but woke less frequently with his heart pounding. Less frequently with Yirin's face surfacing out of darkness wearing the expression she'd had the last morning. He'd seen her alive, exasperated with him about something, already reaching for her car keys, already half out the door. He hadn't known it was the last time. He'd been on a phone call. This was the specific stone in Ji-Wook's chest that didn't move regardless of what else shifted. Not that she had died, that he had not said goodbye, that he had raised one finger, while finishing a sentence that he could no longer remember, and she had shaken her head with that fond, irritated look and walked out. In 17 days of watching Imani dance, Ji-Wook had not fully processed this. But something about those 17 nights had made the stone sit differently. Not smaller, just less sharp at the edges. He understood this was not a healthy arrangement. He did it anyway. On the 18th night, something changed. Imani had been moving slowly to something that sounded almost like old soul music. Nothing Ji-Wook could identify when she turned unexpectedly, reaching for the counter behind her to set down her glass. The motion brought her facing directly toward the door. Ji-Wook did not move in time. Their eyes met. The moment lasted approximately 3 seconds and felt considerably longer. Imani's body went completely still. Expression traveled through surprise, confusion, and something that was not quite fear, but was in that neighborhood the adrenaline response of a person who realizes they have not been alone when they believed they were. Ji-Wook's first instinct was retreat. He had been standing in the dark watching his employee dance for 17 nights. There was no version of that sentence that sounded like anything other than what it was. He didn't retreat. "How long?" Imani said. Her voice came out quieter than she probably intended. Ji-Wook stepped into the kitchen doorway, where the light reached him fully. He owed her that much. "Longer than I should have," he said. "Tonight and before tonight." The silence that followed was the kind that has weight. Imani set her glass down on the counter with a small, careful click. She pulled her sweatshirt down slightly at the hem, not embarrassed exactly, Ji-Wook thought, but reassembling herself. Reclaiming her dignity in the small ways available when a person has been caught doing something private. "That's a strange answer," she said finally. "It's an honest one." She looked at him for a long moment. Whatever calculation she was running behind her eyes, he couldn't follow it. Imani Bellrose had a face that revealed what she chose to reveal and retained what she chose to retain, which was a quality Ji-Wook recognized because he had spent 30 years cultivating the same thing in himself. "Could have just gotten water," she said. Yes. Or said something. The first time, yes. Another silence. The radio played something that had faded, almost below hearing. Outside, somewhere on the grounds, a security patrol completed its circuit with the soft crunch of gravel that Ji-Wook's ear had learned to register without conscious attention. Why didn't you? Imani asked. Ji-Wook considered the real answer. Then he gave it, which was not something he did habitually. Because I was afraid that if I spoke, it would stop. He watched her absorb that, watched her decide something. What would stop, she asked carefully. Whatever that is, Ji-Wook said. He gestured at the room, the soft light, the quiet radio, the space she had claimed in the middle of the night, in the middle of his enormous grieving house. The only part of my day when it gets quiet, here. He touched his chest briefly, then dropped his hand, self-conscious about the gesture, in a way he hadn't expected. I know that's not your responsibility. I know it's not your problem. Imani was watching him, with an expression he couldn't read. Why do you dance? He asked, in the middle of the night. Alone. She didn't answer immediately. She moved to the small kitchen table and pulled out a chair, not inviting him to sit, just sitting herself, making herself more comfortable with the conversation. And Ji-Wook recognized that as an intelligent tactical decision by someone who had been caught off balance and was quietly restoring her footing. My mother, she said finally. She taught me. She told him what she had never particularly intended to tell her employer, though she told it in a measured way, without sentimentality, the same way she seemed to approach most things that mattered to her. When she was 12 years old and her father had left, not dramatically, not in a scene, just gradually less present until he was simply gone. Her mother had pulled her into their kitchen in the middle of a random Tuesday night and turned on the radio and started dancing. Just the two of them, in their small apartment kitchen, in the dark, moving to whatever was playing. She said sadness has to move through the body, Imani said. Otherwise, it gets stuck somewhere and just sits there making you heavy. You have to give it somewhere to go. Ji-Wook pulled out the other chair and sat down across from her. When did she die? He asked, because he had heard the past tense in her description of her mother, and there was no diplomatic way to raise it that wouldn't be worse than the direct question. Imani looked at him steadily. 2 years ago, March. Ovarian cancer. I'm sorry. I know you know what that's like, she said. The after part. When the house doesn't feel the same anymore. It was perhaps the most direct thing anyone had said to him about his wife's death in 11 months. His staff didn't mention it. His business associates had sent flowers and condolences within appropriate timeframes and then returned to business. Moojin was loyal and present but handled Ji-Wook's emotional landscape, the way experienced security personnel handled most uncertain terrain carefully, from a distance, with attention to exits. Imani said it the way she apparently said most things, because it was true and therefore worth saying. Yes, Ji-Wook said. I know exactly what that's like. Something loosened between them then. Not all the way. Ji-Wook felt it more as a slight releasing of pressure, a shift in the room's atmosphere from cautious to simply honest. You should have told me, she said, the first night. It would have been, I don't know. Less strange, I know. Do you do that? Watch people without saying anything. The faintest edge of something not quite humor, but related to it crossed her face as she asked. Professionally, Ji-Wook said yes. Imani laughed. It was a short sound, surprised out of her, and it changed her face in the same way. Ji-Wook had noticed it changed Sena's completely for just a moment, like a window opening. That's a concerning answer, she said. It is, he agreed. Sat there until 2 in the morning, talking not about anything dramatic, not circling each other's grief like it was the only subject. They talked the way two people talk when they have accidentally arrived at honesty and find it less exhausting than the alternative. She told him about growing up in Atlanta. He told her about the year he spent in Busan at 17 before his family moved permanently to the States, the way the city felt different depending on which direction the wind came from. She had 3 siblings. He was an only child. She thought the estate's kitchen was the most impractical kitchen she had ever cooked in. He agreed and told her he hadn't chosen it. When Imani stood to go back to her room, she stopped at the doorway and looked at him. If you can't sleep, she said carefully, You can sit in here. I don't mind company. She disappeared up the back stairs before Ji-Wook could decide whether he had heard that correctly. He sat in the kitchen for another 20 minutes after she was gone, with the radio playing softly to the empty room and the coast mist pressing against the dark windows, and the stone in his chest sitting exactly where it always sat, unchanged, unmoved. But the edges were less sharp again. He came back the next night, and the night after that. And within a week, Ji-Wook had stopped pretending he was coming downstairs for any reason other than what it actually was. The first honest thing he had allowed himself in close to a year. Say. He would sit at the kitchen table in the low light, and after she was finished, they would drink tea and talk until the hour became unreasonable. And then she would go upstairs, alone before eventually going to his office, and finding that the work came easier when the worst of the silence had been pushed back a little. He told himself this was manageable. He told himself it was simply gratitude. She had brought his daughter back to something that resembled her previous self. She had given him 17 nights of watching someone be completely and privately human, which had turned out to be something he desperately needed without knowing the category of need. That was all. What he did not account for, what Ji-Wook, who was methodical about risk in every professional dimension, failed entirely to account for, was the way the conversations were changing him. Because Imani Bellrose did not treat him like power. She treated him like a person, an imperfect, tired, complicated person who had experienced loss and was doing only marginally well at managing it. She pushed back on things he said. She disagreed with his assessment of Sena's emotional state one evening and walked him through her reasoning so patiently and precisely that he had ultimately conceded she was right and spent the next 3 days quietly furious about it before accepting it. She made him feel visible in a way he hadn't felt in years. And Ji-Wook, who understood power better than he understood most things, recognized too late that this was its own kind of danger. Not to her, not yet. But the city doesn't warn you when something is about to change. The night doesn't announce itself. You look up one morning and realize the life you have been carefully maintaining has shifted in some direction you weren't paying attention to. And the question isn't whether you're going to address it, but how honest you're willing to be about what shifted and why. Ji-Wook looked at his reflection in the dark kitchen window late on a Thursday night, with the radio down low and the sound of Imani's footsteps already retreating up the back stairs, and understood that something was already in motion that he did not entirely control. This was an unfamiliar sensation. He didn't know yet that unfamiliar and dangerous were about to become exactly the same word. 3 nights later, Imani was standing at the counter with her back to him, making tea when she went quiet in the particular way. She went quiet when something was working its way toward the surface. Ji-Wook had learned to recognize it over weeks of midnight conversations, a certain qualia of this, a pause in the small movements that filled her hands when she talked. "Can I ask you something?" she said. Not quite a question. "Yes. Sena told me today that her mom's car broke." Ji-Wook said nothing. "I told her that's what I'd heard, too." Imani turned around. She looked at him steadily across the width of the kitchen. "Is that the truth?" The stone in Ji-Wook's chest suddenly felt very large. The right answer was yes. The efficient answer was yes. The answer that protected Sena, protected the household, protected the careful management of a grief he had been controlling. For nearly a year, the answer was yes. And Ji-Wook had given it to every person who had asked him across 11 months of asking. He looked at Imani Bellrose, who had brought his daughter's laugh back, and who moved through grief like someone who had learned it by touch, who treated him like a person and pushed back on his reasoning and sat with him in the dark, without making it strange. He found to his considerable alarm that he was unable to lie to her. "No," Han Ji-Wook said quietly. "That is not the truth." The word landed in the kitchen like something dropped from a height. "No." Imani stood very still. The kettle had finished, but she didn't move toward it. She kept her eyes on Ji-Wook's face, reading the weight behind that single syllable, understanding in the way that people understand things before they fully understand them, in the body first, then the mind catching up a half second later. "Then what is the truth?" she asked. Ji-Wook pulled out the chair across from her and sat down slowly, the way a person sits when they have made a decision and are giving themselves the last few seconds before it becomes irreversible. He laced his fingers together on the table. He looked at his own hands for a moment. Yi-Rin's car didn't fail, he said. Someone made it fail. The silence in the kitchen had a different quality now. Imani set down the mug she'd been holding without filling it. She moved to the table and sat across from him, not because she was composed, but because her legs had decided that standing was no longer the appropriate choice. Who? She said. An organization called the Guryong Circle. Ji-Wook said the name the way people say the names of things they have thought about until the words lost their surface and became something harder underneath. They've been in territorial conflict with my operation for close to 6 years. They decided the most efficient way to destabilize me was to take something I couldn't replace. Imani absorbed this. She was quiet for a long time, long enough that the refrigerator cycled on and the sound of it filled the room. Does Sena know? She asked. No. She believes what she's been told. And you've let her believe it. It wasn't quite an accusation. But it wasn't neutral either. Ji-Wook met her eyes. She's 7 years old. I know how old she is. Then you know why. Imani pressed her fingers flat against the table. I know why you started the lie. I'm asking if you've thought about what happens when it stops being something you can manage. Ji-Wook said nothing. Because she's going to grow up, Imani said. And she's going to ask questions that get harder to answer. And when she finds out, when she's going to remember that you had time to tell her the truth and chose not to. I'm aware of that. Are you? The question had an edge to it that Imani didn't try to sand down. She wasn't angry exactly. Ji-Wook could feel the difference. She was something more uncomfortable than angry. She was concerned in the way that people are concerned when they care about the outcome, and that was the part that sat between them in the warm kitchen light doing something to the air. I'm doing what I can to protect her, Ji-Wook said. From the truth about her mother's death. From the weight of it. There's a difference. Is there? Imani looked at him directly. Or is it that carrying it alone is just what you know how to do? Ji-Wook had no answer for that. He sat with it instead, which was also something she had inadvertently taught him, that some things didn't require an immediate response, and the reflex to produce one was itself a defense mechanism. Outside, the patrol gravel crunched, the coast wind shifted and pressed briefly against the windows. Somewhere above them, Sena slept in her room with her stuffed rabbit tucked against her side. Dreaming whatever 7-year-olds dream when the adult world is keeping careful watch. There's more, Ji-Wook said. Imani looked at him. In the past several weeks, my security chief has identified movement. Vehicles that don't belong to this neighborhood. A pattern of observation that's inconsistent with coincidence. He chose his words carefully, but not to soften them, to be precise. Guryong is positioning again. I don't know the specific objective yet, but they are active. Imani was completely still. And you're telling me this because you live in this house, Ji-Wook said. Because you take Sena to school. Because the perimeter of danger is not something I can keep entirely theoretical for you anymore. And it wouldn't be right to let you move through your days without knowing the environment you're moving through. Something shifted in Imani's face. Not fear exactly. Recognition. Maybe the particular look of a person whose understanding of their own situation has just been revised in a direction they didn't choose. Okay, she said quietly. I need you to trust my security staff. If Mujin or any of the team communicate a change in routine, I need you to follow it without requiring an explanation in the moment. I can do that. If anything, any interaction feels wrong to you outside this house, you tell me immediately. Not eventually. Immediately. Ji-Wook. She said his name without the formal prefix and didn't seem to notice she'd done it, or decided not to care. I understand. He nodded. He pushed back from the table. I'm sorry, he said. It came out rougher than he intended, with more texture than the words usually carried when he used them. For the situation, for placing you. Stop. Imani shook her head once, not harshly. You didn't place me anywhere. I took a job. I made choices. Don't apologize for other people's violence. Ji-Wook looked at her across the table for a moment. Then he left the kitchen, because staying any longer was beginning to feel like something he couldn't categorize cleanly, and uncategorizable things made him careful. Kong Mu-jin was waiting in Ji-Wook's office when he came upstairs. This was not unusual. Mu-jin operated on a schedule that had little relationship with me. A holdover from 15 years of security work that had trained his body to treat sleep as optional. He was 44, compact and deliberate in his movements, with the kind of stillness that people who had done field work carried permanently. He had a tablet open on his knee, and he rose when Ji-Wook entered, but Ji-Wook waved him back down. "How long have you been waiting?" Ji-Wook asked. 20 minutes. I didn't want to interrupt. Ji-Wook sat behind his desk. "What do you have?" Mu-jin turned the tablet and slid it across the desk. On the screen were 3 photographs, grainy, shot with long-range equipment from significant distance. Clearly surveillance images of surveillance. A dark sedan, a partial plate. A second vehicle, different make, parked on a different street, same time window. Same car logged 4 separate positions in 8 days, Mu-jin said. Never the same spot twice. Rotating through positions with sightlines to the east gate, the school route, and the market on Clement that Ms. Bellrose visits on Thursdays. Ji-Wook was very still. "The market," he repeated. "Yes, they've mapped her routine. They've mapped several routines, but the concentration of observation points around Ms. Bellrose's movements is disproportionate compared to yours." Mu-jin paused, the way he paused before saying things he knew would require processing. "I believe they've identified her as a point of interest. Possibly leverage." Ji-Wook set the tablet down on the desk. He pressed 2 fingers against the bridge of his nose. "The plate," he said. "Partial. I have a contact running it against Guryong-adjacent vehicle registrations. I should have something within 48 hours. Want eyes on every approach to that school. I want the Thursday market route changed immediately. And I want someone on her when she leaves this property. I don't care how discreet, I want it done. Already initiated on the school. The other 2 I'll have in place by morning." Ji-Wook nodded. Mu-jin didn't leave. "Something else?" Ji-Wook asked. Mu-jin had worked for Ji-Wook for 11 years. In that time, he had delivered information about extortion attempts, organizational betrayals, the details of Yi Rin's death, and the intelligence reports confirming what had killed her. He was not a man who hesitated before difficult conversations. The fact that he was hesitating now registered clearly. "I've been watching the household dynamic over the past several weeks," Mu-jin said. Ji-Wook said nothing. "Ms. Bellrose is good with Sena. Exceptional, actually. That's not my concern." A pause. "My concern is that if Guryong has already identified her as emotionally significant to this household, and the pattern of evidence currently suggests they have then the target on her back is not theoretical. It is specific, and it will get worse the more visible that significance becomes." Ji-Wook met his security chief's eyes steadily. "Are you telling me to limit contact with her?" he asked. "I'm telling you what the threat matrix looks like," Mu-jin said. "What you do with that information is your decision." He left the tablet on the desk and walked out. Ji-Wook sat alone in his office for a long time after that. The security footage feed was open on one of his monitors, the state grounds. At 4 in the morning, everything quiet and precisely lit. The ocean beyond the far fence, a dark suggestion. He thought about Yi Rin. He thought about the last morning. The raised finger. Wait. He thought about Imani in the kitchen saying, "Don't apologize for other people's violence." He thought about the photographs on the tablet. The sedan parked within sight up the Thursday market on Clement Street. He had believed, when he decided to tell her the truth about Yi Rin's death, that honesty was something he owed her. He understood now that the calculation was more complicated than that. He had told her the truth, and the truth had made her a target more knowingly than she had been one before. He stayed at his desk until the sky outside his window began to pale. 4 days later, Imani picked Sena up from school on a Tuesday at 3:15 in the afternoon, the same as always. Sena came out holding a painting she'd made in art class, not representational exactly. Senavan emotional landscape in blue and yellow, and talked the entire way to the car about a disagreement with a classmate named Priya that had apparently been resolved through the diplomatic exchange of stickers. They were on the sidewalk between the school gate and the car when the man appeared. He came from her left, moving at the casual angle of someone who had placed himself in her path without making it look deliberate. He was wearing a jacket with a small laminated badge clipped to the breast pocket, the kind of badge that implied authority without specifying it. He smiled the way people smile when they want you to believe the conversation is routine. Ms. Bellrose? Imani had Sena's hand in hers. She stopped. Yes? Sorry to catch you on the go. I'm doing a safety review for families in the district. He produced a clipboard. Professional prop. Just a couple quick questions. Do you handle the regular pickups for the Han household? Something moved through Imani's chest. Not panic, something cooler and more deliberate than panic. She had grown up in Atlanta, and she had worked in 4 households before this one, and she had developed, over the years, an accurate and finely tuned sense of when a situation was not what it was presenting itself to be. This was not what it was presenting itself to be. I'm a little pressed for time, she said pleasantly. She squeezed Sena's hand once, the private signal they had developed weeks ago for move with me now without making it obvious. Maybe you can follow up through the school office? The man smiled. It didn't reach anything above his mouth. It'll just take a second. I want to ask about the typical pickup window, whether there are days when the schedule varies, when the property might be quieter. I'm sorry, Imani said, already moving. The school office will have whatever you need. Kept her pace even. She did not look back. She got Sena into the car with the door closed and the locks down before her hands had fully steadied, and she sat there for 4 seconds, with her eyes on the rearview mirror before she reached for her phone. Ji-Wook picked up on the first ring. There was a man at the school, she said. He had a badge. He asked about the pickup schedule and when the property gets quiet. Silence for 2 seconds. Are you in the car? Yes. Sena's with me. Drive him directly home. Do not stop. Mu-jin will meet you at the gate. Ji-Wook, I'm sorry, he said, and this time the word carried nothing formal in it at all. Drive. Mu-jin was indeed at the gate when she pulled in, and 2 additional security staff materialized at the car before she'd finished stopping. They were professional and calm and moved Sena toward the house with the practiced ease of people who had drilled this scenario. And Imani stood in the driveway for a moment after the car door closed and felt something catch up to her that the adrenaline had been outrunning. Ji-Wook was on the steps. She's fine, Imani said immediately, because that was the first thing to establish. I know. I can see that. He looked at her with an attention that was not his professional attention, the kind he turned on problems he needed to solve. This was different. Closer. Are you fine? Yes. I'm fine. She pressed her hands flat against her thighs. Who was that man? I don't know yet. Mu-jin will find out. Ji-Wook descended the last step so they were level. What exactly did he ask? She told him. Every question, every word she could reconstruct, the angle of approach, the badge, she hadn't gotten close enough to read properly. Ji-Wook listened without interrupting, which was how he always listened, with the quality of attention that made you feel that the information was being received fully and filed precisely. When she finished, his jaw was set. The property getting quiet, he said. It was not a question. That was the phrase. He was quiet for a moment. You handled it correctly, he said. You gave him nothing. I know. She paused. Ji-Wook, is this going to keep happening? He looked at her. I don't know, he said, which she understood was the honest answer, because he had defaulted to honesty with her, even when it cost him the appearance of control. Inside the house, Sena could be heard demanding to show Mrs. Park the blue and yellow painting before it got put away, and the small, ordinary domestic sound of it pressed against the moment between them in a way that made the situation simultaneously more frightening and more real. They had Sena in their world, not just in their concern, not just as an abstraction to protect. Sena was the actual binding thing, the small persistent life that made the stakes specific. Imani went inside. She spent the next 2 hours with Sena as if the afternoon had been entirely normal, because Sena was 7 and observant and would catch the exact frequency of adult anxiety if it was running unchecked. She helped with the painting. She negotiated dinner. She did the bath, the pajamas, the rabbit. The ritual reading of exactly 3 pages of the current book Sena was strict about 3 pages. Not 2, not 4, exactly 3, and finally sat beside the bed until the child's breathing evened out and the room settled into its nighttime quiet. Then she went downstairs. Moo-jin was in the dining room with Ji-Wook. There was a laptop open, a map on the screen with several points marked in red. They stopped talking when Imani appeared in the doorway, and Moo-jin looked at Ji-Wook, who gave a small nod. "Please," Ji-Wook said to her. "Come in," she sat. Moo-jin said the badge he was carrying corresponds to a safety review program that the school district does in fact operate. He obtained legitimate materials. Whatever he is, he's careful. But he's not with the district, Imani said. No. The district ran their review 3 months ago. This man was not part of that team. So he did his research, Imani said. Yes. What does that mean about what he's after? Moo-jin looked at Ji-Wook again. It means, Ji-Wook said, that whoever sent him is thorough, and that the questions he asked you, the schedule, the quiet periods were operational questions. Intelligence gathering. For what operation? The question sat in the room. We don't know the specific objective yet, Moo-jin said. But the pattern of surveillance over the past several weeks, combined with today's approach, suggests a coordinated effort to identify. He chose the word deliberately. Pressure points within this household. Imani looked at him. And I'm a pressure point, she said. Nobody said no. The understanding settled on her the way heavy things settle, not all at once, but completely, until you realize you've been holding the weight for a few seconds already, without knowing it. She was not just an employee who happened to live in a monitored house. She had become, in the calculation of people who did not know her and would not think twice about her, a useful instrument for reaching someone they considered an enemy. The midnight conversations, the kitchen, the way Sena reached for her hand without thinking about it. Someone had seen that from the outside and decided it had value. How long have you known this was the situation? She asked. She kept her voice even. Ji-Wook said, I've known the surveillance was active for several weeks. The specific focus on you, Moo-jin, confirmed the pattern more recently. More recently meaning 6 days ago, 6 days. Imani sat with that. You waited 6 days to tell me. I was trying to what? Manage it before I found out. She wasn't raising her voice. Something had gone past anger into something quieter and more precise. I went to that school twice in those 6 days. I took Sena to the park. I went to the market on Thursday. You were covered, Ji-Wook said. There were 2 team members with you each time. You didn't see them, but that's not the point. I know. I had the right to know what I was walking into. Yes, Ji-Wook said. You did. I made a decision to try to resolve the situation before bringing it to you, and I was wrong to make that decision without your knowledge. I won't insult you by explaining my reasoning as though my reasoning excuses it. The apology was direct and undecorated, which was the only kind she would have accepted. She looked at the map on the laptop screen, the red points. What are those? She asked. Positions where the surveillance vehicles have been logged, Moo-jin said. How many? 11 distinct positions over 3 weeks. Imani looked at the cluster of points around the route between the estate and Sena's school. She looked at the one near the market on Clement. She took a breath. Okay, she said. What do I do? Ji-Wook and Moo-jin exchanged a brief look that contained an entire conversation. For now, Moo-jin said, the primary change is that you do not go anywhere without coverage. Not to the school, not to any errands, not outside these grounds at all, without prior coordination. If the schedule changes for any reason, you hear from me directly before you move. That's fine. Any contact, any person who approaches you unexpectedly, any vehicle that seems to recur in your environment, you report it immediately. I understand. I'll be adjusting Sena's school protocols as well. There will be a second vehicle on the pickup going forward. Always. Good. Jean closed the laptop and left the room with the efficiency of a man who measured time carefully and had other things to address. Ji-Wook and Imani were alone. The dining room was large and formal and poorly suited to the kind of conversation that was now necessary between them. She thought about the kitchen. She thought about the first night he had stood in the doorway and said, longer than I should have. I need to ask you something, she said. Ask. What happened to the last person who stood close to you when your enemies were looking for pressure points? Ji-Wook went very still. He understood immediately what she was asking and why she was asking it, and he understood that the honest answer was the only one she would tolerate, and also possibly the worst one available. Yirin, he said. Yes. A long silence. Yirin was my wife, he said. The decision to involve her in this life was not. He stopped. Restarted. She knew what I was. She chose. But what I failed to do was take the threat to her seriously when I first became aware it existed. I believed I had more time to address it than I did. His voice was level, but level, the way surfaces are level when there is enormous pressure held just underneath. I was wrong, and I was unable to correct the mistake. Imani watched him say this, watched the effort it required. I will not make that mistake again, he said. I believe that you believe that, Imani said carefully. Something moved across his face. But, he said, but you also believed you had time the first time. She held his gaze. And with Yirin, you had years of built-in security around her. With me, you've had 11 months and 6 days of surveillance that I didn't know about. She paused. I'm not trying to wound you. I'm trying to be accurate about the situation. I know, so I need you to hear me when I say that I'm not going anywhere. Her voice was steady. Not because I'm brave, or because I don't understand what this means. Because Sena is upstairs, and she is finally beginning to feel like herself again. And I am not going to disappear on her because somebody made me a chess piece in somebody else's war. Ji-Wook looked at her for a long moment. You should be frightened, he said. I am frightened, she said. I'm also furious. Those two things can happen at the same time. It was 11 days after the school incident that Imani went to the market. Not the one on Clement Mujin had routed that stopped to a different location 3 weeks ago. This was a small neighborhood grocery closer to the estate's western access, one of 2 alternating routes Mujin had approved. She had the coverage she was supposed to have. She followed the protocols. She was picking up specific items for a recipe she'd promised Sena on Friday. She was in the produce section when she felt the weight of being watched and turned around. The man was not the same man from the school. He was taller, older, wearing ordinary clothes and holding a basket with several items in it, and he was looking directly at her with the specific expression of someone who has no interest in pretending he isn't looking. He walked toward her, Ms. Bellrose. His Korean accent was light but present. I don't want to frighten you. Then walk away, she said. I just have one question. He stopped at what he might have calculated was a non-threatening distance. We're curious how serious it is. Between you and Han Ji-Wook. He smiled pleasantly. Because that determines how useful you are to us. Imani looked at him. Her phone was in her left hand. Her thumb found the emergency contact Mujin had programmed 3 weeks ago. I don't know what you're talking about, she said. Of course you do. He tilted his head slightly. We've been watching for quite a while. You're not just the nanny, are you? She pressed the contact. I'm going to keep shopping now, she said, and you're going to leave. He studied her for a moment with the evaluating look of a person filing information. Then he smiled again, unhurried, which was the frightening part, and turned and walked toward the exit. By the time Mujin's team had the perimeter, he was gone. Imani was sitting in the car with her groceries in the back seat and her hands in her lap when Mujin reached her window. He looked at her face and said nothing for a moment. He asked how serious it is, she said. Between Ji-Wook and me. She kept her voice flat because flat was what was available. He said it determines how useful I am to them. Mujin's expression didn't change, but something behind it did. I need to call Mr. Han, he said. I know, she said. She stared through the windshield at a parking lot that looked completely ordinary in the afternoon light. Behind her groceries for a Friday recipe. Above the estate somewhere, Sena was finishing her school day. She thought about what the man had said with his unhurried smile and his evaluating eyes. How serious it is. Between you and Han Ji-Wook. And she understood, sitting in that car, whatever the true answer actually was, had already been observed and measured by people who intended to use it. Which meant it wasn't private anymore. Which meant it had never been only theirs to figure out. Ji-Wook was already on his phone when Moo-jin pulled into the estate with Imani in the second vehicle behind him. He was standing at the top of the front steps with his jacket still on, which meant he had been in the middle of something when the call came through and had not stopped to remove it before coming outside. Imani registered this detail the way she registered most details about him, now automatically against her will, with the accuracy of someone who had spent months learning to read a person who did not make himself easy to read. She got out of the car before it fully stopped and walked straight to him. "Did Moo-jin tell you what he said?" she asked. "Yes." "All of it?" "Yes." Ji-Wook ended his phone call and put the device in his pocket. He looked at her face with the specific attention he reserved for situations where emotion was running underneath, something that had to be managed practically. "Come inside." "I'm fine." "I know you are. Come inside anyway." They went into the study, rather than the kitchen, the formal room, the one with the desk and the security monitors, and the sense that everything said in it was being said in a professional, rather than personal register. Moo-jin followed and closed the door. Ji-Wook moved to the desk but didn't sit behind it. He stood at its edge. "He knew my name," Imani said. "He walked directly to me. He knew exactly which market, exactly which section of the store." "I know. Which means the route change didn't help." They picked up the new route. Moo-jin said, "Or there's a second team we haven't identified yet." "Or someone told them," Imani said. The room went quiet. She hadn't planned to say it. It arrived out of the logic of the situation, the way certain conclusions arrive. You follow the steps and suddenly the answer is in front of you, and you can't pretend you haven't seen it. Moo-jin's eyes moved to Ji-Wook. Ji-Wook's expression had gone very still. "That's a significant allegation," he said. "I'm not alleging anything. I'm describing what the facts suggest." Imani kept her voice level. "The route was changed 3 weeks ago. Only people inside this household knew the new route. And a man I've never seen before walked directly to me at the new location." She looked at Ji-Wook steadily. "Those are your facts. You do the math." Moo-jin set the laptop on the desk and opened it. "I'll start a communications audit." "No," Ji-Wook said. Moo-jin looked up. "Not yet. Do it quietly. Nothing that signals we're looking internally." Ji-Wook's voice had shifted into the register Imani had heard only twice before, calm, in the way that very cold things are calm, with no warmth left in it at all. "If there's a source inside the household, I want them to believe they haven't been identified. Give them the confidence to make another move. That's a risk," Moo-jin said. "Everything is a risk." Ji-Wook turned to Imani. "Until this is resolved, you don't share information about your schedule with anyone on staff. Not Mrs. Park, not the drivers, not the gate personnel. If you need to go somewhere, you tell me or you tell Moo-jin directly." "You think it's someone in the house?" Imani said. "I think it's possible." He paused. "I hope I'm wrong." He didn't look like he thought he was wrong. That night, Sena had a nightmare. Imani heard her through the monitor at 2 in the morning, not the full panic kind of cry, but the confused half-awake kind that needed company rather than comfort. She was in Sena's room in 45 seconds, sitting on the edge of the bed and putting her hand on the child's back before Sena was fully awake. "I'm here," she said quietly. "I'm right here." Sena turned over and looked at her with the unfocused eyes of someone operating in the space between sleep and consciousness. "I had a bad dream, I know, baby. It's gone now." "You promise?" "Yeah, it's gone." Sena considered this with the seriousness of a child evaluating a guarantee. Then she said, "Can you stay until I fall asleep again?" "Of course." Imani sat there in the dark with her hand on Sena's back, feeling the child's breathing gradually slow and even out. The room smelled like the lavender spray Sena insisted on for her pillow and something underneath it that was just Sena, warm and young and specific, in the way that only the people you love are specific. She stayed long after Sena was fully asleep. Not because she needed to, but because sitting in that room in the dark with the child's breathing as the only sound was somehow the steadiest she'd felt all day. When she came back to the hallway, Ji-Wook was standing outside his own bedroom door. He hadn't been sleeping either. He never slept much, she knew this, but tonight it was written on his face in a way he wasn't trying to conceal. "She's fine," Imani said softly. He nodded. They stood in the hallway for a moment. The distance between them was approximately 6 feet and felt considerably smaller. "I'm going to find out who it is," Ji-Wook said. He wasn't talking about Sena's nightmare. "I want you to know that. I know you will. And when I do—" "Ji-Wook," she stopped him. "You don't have to tell me what happens after. I understand the kind of world this is." He looked at her for a moment with something that might have been relief and might have been something more complicated. "Some sleep," she said. "You too." Neither of them were convincing about it. Moo-jin had the first communication intercept, flagged by morning. He brought it to Ji-Wook's office at 6:45, while the house was still quiet and the coast mist had not yet lifted. Ji-Wook read the flagged data twice, then sat back in his chair and was very still for almost a full minute. "How confident are you?" he asked. "In the intercept itself?" "Completely." "In the interpretation?" Moo-jin sat in the chair across the desk, which he rarely did. He tended to stand during briefings, a habit from his earlier work. The fact that he sat now was its own signal. 80%. "I want another 48 hours to complete the pattern." "What's the intercept?" "An outbound communication from inside the estate. 11 days ago, routed through a commercial relay that masks the origin, but the timing correlates precisely with the first approach at the school." Ji-Wook set the printed intercept on his desk and looked at it. "Which device?" Moo-jin named a phone extension. The room was very quiet. Ji-Wook looked at Moo-jin, and Moo-jin looked back at him, and in 11 years of working together, neither of them had sat in a silence quite like this one. "That extension," Ji-Wook said slowly. "Yes, that's Ro's line." Park Ro was 51 years old and had been Ji-Wook's personal operations manager for 8 years. He was the person who coordinated logistics between Ji-Wook's legitimate business holdings and the underlying operational structure. He knew the estate schedules. He had access to the household staff communications. He had been present, Ji-Wook understood now, with a clarity that arrived like cold water, at every security briefing for the past 3 months. "I need to be wrong about this," Ji-Wook said. "I know. Give me a reason I could be wrong." Moo-jin said nothing, which was its own answer. Ji-Wook stood. He walked to the window and looked out at the property and the mist and the fence line, and beyond it, the Pacific beginning to lighten under the early sky. 8 years. Park Ro had been in that chair for the last meeting before Yi-rin's funeral. He had handed Ji-Wook the reports on her death. He had sat in this office, and Ji-Wook thought about this with a specific kind of nausea. He had expressed grief. Had looked him in the eye and expressed grief. "Find out what he's passed to them," Ji-Wook said. His voice was completely flat. Everything. What he told them about Yi-rin's schedule before she died. Whether he was involved in her death or only involved now. "I need to know the full scope before I move." Moo-jin stood. "That will take however long it takes." Ji-Wook turned from the window. "And Moo-jin, he doesn't leave the property. Make whatever reason you need to make. But he doesn't leave." "Understood." When Moo-jin left, Ji-Wook sat at his desk and did not move for 7 minutes. He knew this because the clock on his monitor was the only thing his eyes tracked, the seconds changing, the minutes accumulating, the morning outside his window advancing, without caring about what was happening inside. Park Ro. 8 years. The thing about betrayal, Ji-Wook had always understood intellectually, was that it required proximity to function. You could not be betrayed by a stranger. You could only be betrayed by someone you had allowed into the architecture of your life, someone you had trusted with information that mattered, with access that had value, with the particular visibility into your vulnerabilities that only time and familiarity produced. He had allowed Park Ro into all of it, and now he had to answer a question he was not ready to answer, which was whether Ro had been in place before Yi-rin died or only after, and whether 8 years that preceded her death had been genuine loyalty that had curdled into something else, or whether Ji-Wook had spent 8 years across the table from a man who was feeding information to the people who killed his wife. He did not yet know. What he knew was that the security of everyone in this house, Sena, Imani, every person on his staff who was not operating against him, depended on his ability to function clearly in the next 72 hours. A sound like green wood splitting and functioning clearly required putting the full weight of what he was feeling somewhere that it couldn't interfere with what needed to be done. He had practice at this. He had done it when Yirin died. He had packaged the grief and put it somewhere interior and load-bearing and went on existing until existing was manageable again. He did it now. He opened the files on his desk and he began to work. By mid-afternoon, Moo-jin had enough to brief. He came into the study and closed the door and placed a folder on the desk, and did not sit down this time. Ji-Wook read the first 3 pages without speaking. The communication to Guryong started approximately 14 months ago, Moo-jin said. Based on the pattern of the intercepts, Ro initiated contact. They didn't approach him. Ji-Wook looked up from the file. He came to them, Ji-Wook said. Yes. We haven't identified the specific motivation yet, financial pressure, personal grievance, something else entirely. But the initiation was his. Ji-Wook turned to page 4. What was in the first communication? He asked, though part of him had already understood what was coming from the look on Moo-jin's face. Moo-jin said Yirin's schedule, her regular driving routes. The days she didn't take security coverage because she preferred driving alone. A pause. The time window on the morning of the accident. Ji-Wook closed the folder. He placed both hands flat on the desk. The office was completely silent. Moo-jin stood across the desk with the expression of a man who had chosen this career, knowing it would require him to deliver certain categories of information, and had never stopped finding some of them unbearable, despite knowing they were coming. Ji-Wook said he gave them Yirin. Yes, 1 word. 1 syllable. The room absorbed it. Ji-Wook did not move. He held his hands flat against the desk and breathed with the deliberate evenness of someone managing something enormous with only the mechanisms immediately available, and Moo-jin watched him do it and said nothing, because there was nothing to say. After 30 seconds, Ji-Wook asked, "Where is he now?" "In his office. He believes he's being retained for a routine communication security review. He's compliant, comfortable." Moo-jin's voice was careful and even. "He doesn't know we have the intercepts. Is anyone with him?" "2 of our people, positioned as administrative staff. He has no suspicion." Ji-Wook nodded once he stood. He straightened his jacket with 2 precise movements. "I'll speak with him myself," he said. Ji-Wook. "I'll speak with him myself." Moo-jin did not argue. He had worked for this man for 11 years, and he knew the particular quality of the statement that had just been made, the one that sounded like a decision, but was actually the end of a decision-making process that had already resolved completely somewhere internal. They walked down the corridor to the secondary office that Ro used when he was working from the estate. The door was closed. Moo-jin opened it. Park Ro looked up from his laptop with the expression of a man whose afternoon had been completely ordinary. He was heavyset, graying at the temples, wearing the reading glasses he affected when he wanted to appear absorbed in detail. He had, Ji-Wook, now catalogued, the face of a person who had spent a great deal of time practicing calm. "Ji-Wook," he said, something in his tone not alarm, but the slight recalibration that preceded it. "I wasn't expecting. Close the laptop," Ji-Wook said. Ro closed it. Ji-Wook sat across from him, not at the head of the table, not behind Ro's desk. Directly across, at the same level, which was a choice Ro would understand if he was paying attention. He was paying attention. Ji-Wook watched him begin to pay attention. "I want to ask you about something," Ji-Wook said. Conversational, light, almost. The route change for Imani, the grocery route that Moo-jin changed 3 weeks ago. "Do you know which staff members were informed?" Ro's expression was entirely steady. "Logistics would have distributed the updated protocol. The driver's gate security." "Did you receive the update?" "I receive all household security updates." "Of course." Ji-Wook nodded as though this was simply confirming something minor. "And the school pickup window for Sena, the specific timing that Moo-jin flagged for additional coverage." "You were in that briefing?" A slight pause. 1 second. "Almost nothing." "Yes," Ro said. "Standard attendance." Ji-Wook looked at him. Ro looked back. 2 men who had spent 8 years in the same rooms, at the same tables, having conversations that required each of them to read the other's intentions accurately. Ji-Wook had always believed he did this well. He was revising that assessment in real time. "I need to show you something," Ji-Wook said. He opened the folder Moo-jin had placed on the table and laid the first intercept in front of Park Ro. Ro looked at it. His face did not collapse immediately. That was the thing Ji-Wook would remember later, the 2 seconds in which Ro's face held its ordinary configurations, while the man behind it made calculations. Option A. Option B. Whether denial was viable. Whether the document in front of him was complete or partial. Whether there was a version of this room that he walked out of. Then the calculation resolved, and the face changed. Not into guilt. Not into the remorse Ji-Wook had perhaps, in some part of himself, been half expecting. Into something smaller and more resigned. How much do you have? Ro asked. 14 months of outbound communications, the financial transfers, the schedule data on Yi-Rin. Ji-Wook kept his voice completely even. Time window on the morning of her accident. Ro looked at the document. He didn't look at Ji-Wook. Why? Ji-Wook said. The word came out as flat as anything he had ever said. No inflection, no anger yet. Because the anger was behind something thick and pressurized, and he was not prepared to open that particular door in this room. 8 years. I want to understand why. Ro's jaw worked slightly. He pressed his lips together. They approached me with information, he said finally. About you, about decisions you'd made that had cost people. He paused. About a specific decision, 8 years ago, that cost me something I couldn't recover from. What decision, my son? Ro said, the operation in Busan. The one where your logistics team made a call that left 3 people exposed. My son was one of them. Ji-Wook was very still. He survived, Ro said. But what he survived with, he stopped. You moved on. The way you move on from operational losses. The way this entire structure moves on from people who get broken in the machinery. You should have come to me, Ji-Wook said. I came to your assistant. Ro's voice was controlled, but something underneath it was not. 3 times. I was told it wasn't the right time. I was given money. His mouth tightened. Money is very helpful when someone you love has stopped being the person they were. The room held this. Ji-Wook thought about 8 years. About the operational loss in Busan that he had in fact moved past efficiently. About the category of people in his organization who were present in every briefing and trusted with every schedule and close enough to the machinery to see exactly what it cost when it ground through. Someone, and how little the accounting changed afterward. So Grieving came to you, Ji-Wook said. They found me, yes. They knew about my son. They offered not money. They offered the name of the person in your organization who made the call in Busan. He looked up finally and met Ji-Wook's eyes. I wanted the name. I thought that was all I wanted. But once you're inside a conversation with them, there's no clean exit. And Yi-Rin, Ji-Wook asked. The words came out very quietly. When they asked for her schedule, her route, the morning she drove alone. Ro's eyes dropped to the table. Did you know what they intended to do with it? Ji-Wook asked. Silence. Ro. I knew it was possible they intended to use it against her. The words came slowly, like something being extracted rather than volunteered. Told myself they wanted leverage. Information to pressure you. I didn't let myself. You gave them the time window, Ji-Wook said. The specific window when she drove without coverage. You knew her habits. You knew exactly what that information was for. Ro said nothing. Look at me, Ji-Wook said. Ro looked up. Did you know they were going to kill her? The silence that followed was approximately 4 seconds. I told myself I didn't know for certain, Ro said. Ji-Wook stood. He did not shout. He did not overturn the table or strike the man across from him, though something in him was operating at a frequency that made the room feel physically different, that made the air feel like it had weight and heat and direction. He stood. He picked up the folder from the table. And under it his hands were trembling, slightly with the effort of containing something that had no clean outlet in this room at this moment. Mujin will take it from here, he said. He walked to the door. Ji-Wook, Ro's voice. I am sorry what I did to your wife. I am whatever that is worth to you. I know what it's worth. Ji-Wook stopped at the door. He stood with his hand on the frame and his back to the room. It's worth nothing, he said, and everything. And I don't have a category for that right now, so I'm going to walk out of this room and let the people who are better at it than I am take over. He left. He walked down the corridor to the far end, where there was a window above the estate's eastern garden, and he stood there with both hands on the window ledge and breathed. Just breathed. In through the nose, the way his mother had taught him as a child. When his temper ran ahead of his judgment, count the breath. Let it move through, count it again. Yi-Rin. She had driven alone that morning because she preferred it. She had said many times that the security detail made her feel watched in her own life. He had let her do it because she was right, and because he had believed at that time that the threat to his household was managed. He had believed it was managed because Park Ro had been in his security briefings and had been providing assessments and had told him the risk was under control. And the entire time Ro had been the open door, not for money, not even for ideology, for grief, for a son broken in Ji-Wook's machinery and a father who had knocked on the right doors 3 times and been handed money instead of answers. Ji-Wook understood this in the way that understanding is not forgiveness and not absolution, and not anything that makes what happened acceptable. He understood it the way you understand the mechanics of something terrible with clarity that doesn't release you from the weight of it, only shows you exactly what shape the weight is. He stood at the window for 6 minutes. Then he went to find Imani. She was in the small sitting room off the kitchen, the one Sena had claimed as her craft territory. Months ago, the table perpetually occupied by crayons and stickers and whatever the current project was. Sena was at her after-school activity for another hour. Imani was sitting alone at the craft table with a cup of tea that had probably gone cold, not doing anything in particular except existing quietly in a space she had made her own over months of careful presence. She looked up when he came in and read his face. "Sit down," she said. Not a command. An invitation. He sat, he told her. Not all of it, not the technical details, not the specific shape of what would happen to Ro, but the essential fact of it, that the source of the breach was internal, that it was someone he had trusted for 8 years, that the same person, the same access, the same information pathway that had exposed Imani's schedule was connected probably, in a way he was still forcing himself to examine to Yi-Rin's death. Imani was quiet through all of it. She held her cold cup of tea and she listened with the full-body quality of attention that he had come to recognize as one of the things about her that was unlike anyone else he had spent time with. When he finished, she said, "Are you safe right now? Is the house secure?" He was momentarily startled by the question, not its practicality, but the direction of it. She was asking about him. "Yes," he said. "Mujin has the situation contained." "Okay." She nodded. "And the people at Grieving, they still don't know that you know?" "Correct. They'll continue to expect intelligence from a source that is no longer active. For a window of time, that gives us something to work with." "How long a window?" "Days. A week at most before they notice the silence. And then they recalibrate." Ji-Wook looked at her steadily. "And at that point, the pressure will shift. They'll know the internal source is gone, which means they'll know I found it. And when they know, I know the calculation they've been running about leverage becomes more urgent. Not less." Imani set down her cup. "They'll move faster," she said. "On Sena. Or on me. On whoever they assess as more accessible." He paused. "I am not going to let that happen." She looked at him with an expression that said she believed him and also understood that belief wasn't armor. "Ji-Wook," she said, "I need you to tell me honestly. Not what you want to be true. What you actually think is going to happen." He considered this for a moment. "I think they are going to make a move before I can fully close the perimeter," he said. "I think the window between now and when I can force a confrontation on terms I control is narrow. And I think the most dangerous period is the next 5 to 7 days." Imani absorbed this. "Then I need to be inside those terms," she said. "Whatever confrontation you're planning. I need to understand what it looks like and what my role is, because standing in the dark while decisions get made around me is not working for me anymore." Ji-Wook looked at her across the child's craft table with its crayons and its dried glue and its evidence of the small, ordinary life they were both trying to protect. Spent 11 months building walls. Between himself and his grief, between his work and his daughter, between the part of him that was a mafia boss and the part of him that stood in dark hallways, watching someone dance because it was the only thing that made the night bearable. He had told himself the walls were protection. He had told himself they were necessary, Park Row had been inside every single one of them. And Imani Bellrose, who had arrived with 2 suitcases and a canvas tote full of books and a directness that refused to be managed, was the only person in his house who had looked at the walls and simply declined to treat them as permanent. "All right," he said. She waited. "There is a man," Ji-Wook said. "His name is Baek Do-hwan. He is Guryong's operational coordinator in this city. Everything that has happened, the surveillance, the approaches, the intelligence gathering, runs through him." He leaned forward slightly. "Moo-jin has had his location for 72 hours. I've been waiting to use it because moving without understanding the full scope of the breach would have been premature. And now I understand the full scope." Ji-Wook's voice had shifted into the register that had no warmth left in it, the one she had heard twice before. "I'm going to bring this to him directly, on ground I control. And I'm going to make the terms of what comes next very clear." Imani looked at him. "Is that enough?" she asked. "One conversation?" "It will be," Ji-Wook said, "because what I'm going to show him is that his operation inside this household is burned completely, that the source is gone, that I have documentation of every communication, every instruction, every target request, and that I am prepared to take that documentation to every organization with an interest in Guryong's stability." He paused. "I'm also going to make clear that any further move against Sena or against you will end the territorial arrangement that has allowed Guryong to operate in this city for the past 4 years. You have that kind of leverage over them? I have the capacity to make their situation significantly worse." Which in practical terms is the same thing. Imani was quiet. "What do you need from me?" she asked. "I need you to stay inside the estate for the next 48 hours. I need you to keep Sena's routine as close to normal as possible. She reads your face, and if she senses you're frightened, she'll understand something is wrong, even if she doesn't have language for it." He met her eyes. "And I need you to trust that I am not going to let what happened to Yirin happen to you." The name between them. She heard him say it differently than he'd said it before, not with the locked-away quality she had grown accustomed to, but openly, as a reference point, as something that existed in the same sentence as her name and didn't have to be hidden from either of them. "I know," she said. Outside, a car came through the estate gate. They both heard it, both tracked the sound automatically. The way people in a guarded house learn to track sounds, and then Sena's voice reached them from the front entrance, announcing her return to Mrs. Park at the volume and enthusiasm of a child who has been saving up things to say for an entire hour. Imani stood. She picked up her cold cup of tea and looked at Ji-Wook. "Go do what you need to do," she said. "I'll take care of Sena." He stood. For a moment, they were both standing in the small room at the craft table with the evening light coming in and Sena's voice getting louder in the entryway, and all of it the whole weight of the day, of Park Row and 14 months of intercepted communications, and Ye-Rin's schedule, delivered to people who knew exactly how to use it, all of it pressing against the ordinary moment. Then Sena appeared in the doorway, with paint still on her left hand, from whatever she'd made at the activity, saw them both, and immediately redirected her full communicative energy toward Imani, while simultaneously reaching for Ji-Wook's sleeve. "I made a fish," she announced. "It was supposed to be a bird, but it turned into a fish, which misses." Choi said was actually better, because most birds are boring. Imani looked at Ji-Wook. Ji-Wook looked at his daughter, who was explaining the artistic philosophy of fish versus birds with complete seriousness, while still holding his sleeve and pulling Imani's hand. And in that moment, with Park Row in custody down the corridor and Baek Do-hwan somewhere in the city, running an operation that was about to meet its end and 14 months of betrayal sitting in a folder on a desk, the thing Ji-Wook felt most clearly was the specific, sharp, intolerable weight of what he stood to lose if he did not get every one of the next decisions exactly right. He was done being careful. He was done managing distances and containing walls and protecting himself from the cost of caring about things that could be taken. He looked at Sena's paint-covered hand and Imani's steady eyes and understood that the version of himself who had been standing in dark hallways watching life from a safe remove had already made his last appearance. What came next would require someone different. He was already becoming that person, and the change had a hard cold edge to it that he recognized from the few moments in his life when something fundamental had shifted for good, and he knew, even as Sena launched into the second chapter of the fish versus bird discourse, that the man who walked into that confrontation with Baek Do-hwan in 48 hours would not be someone his enemies had encountered before. The 48 hours Ji-Wook had estimated collapsed into 31. Moojin came to his office at 11:20 the following night with the expression he wore when circumstances had changed faster than the plan. Ji-Wook was already awake, had not slept, had been working through the operational documentation with two of his most trusted analysts, building the case that he intended to lay in front of Baek Do-hwan with the kind of completeness that left no interpretive room. They know, Moojin said. Ji-Wook set down his pen. How? Rowe had a secondary protocol, a check-in signal something passive, a routine data ping to a relay point. It was designed to flag automatically if it stopped. We didn't know it existed. Moojin's jaw was set. It stopped when we took him into custody yesterday. They would have detected the silence within 24 hours. So they've known since this morning. Approximately. Ji-Wook stood. What's the movement? Moojin opened the tablet. 2 vehicles logged by his external surveillance team, positions that had shifted from their usual observation points into something that looked less like watching and more like staging. A 3rd vehicle, new plate, new make, identified near the western access road that ran behind the estate's service entrance. They're not withdrawing, Ji-Wook said. No, they're accelerating. Yes. Moojin looked at him. I think they've decided that the leverage window is closing and they want to use it before it shuts completely. Ji-Wook moved to the security monitor. The estate's perimeter feeds were active 8 cameras covering the fence line, 2 on the main gate, 1 each on the service entrance and the eastern garden wall. Everything was currently quiet, in the way that things are quiet when the problem hasn't arrived yet. Get the team to full coverage, Ji-Wook said. I want the service entrance reinforced. That's the softest point on this property, and they know it. Already moving. Sena stays in her room. I want someone posted outside her door physically, not just on camera. Done. And Imani, she's on the 2nd floor. I checked 20 minutes ago. Ji-Wook turned from the monitor. I'm not waiting for them to bring this here. I'm going to Do-hwan tonight. Moojin looked at him steadily. That's what they want. Draw you out. Hit the house while you're mobile. Then we give them the draw without the gap. Ji-Wook moved to the wall safe behind his desk. I go with a full team. You stay here with secondary coverage. The decoy vehicle goes first. Let them follow it. Keep their attention on the road. He pulled the safe open. Insides were documents, a firearm he had not carried in 2 years, and a small photograph of Sena that he'd placed there years ago for reasons he'd never fully articulated. He left the photograph. He took the other things. Do-hwan's location. A private room at the Hanyang Club on Sacramento. He's been there since 8 o'clock. He booked it 3 days ago. Moojin paused. He expected a different kind of meeting tonight. He's going to get a meeting, Ji-Wook said, just not the one he planned. He was dressed and moving toward the door when Moojin said, Ji-Wook. He stopped. She's going to hear us mobilizing, Moojin said carefully. You should talk to her before you leave. Ji-Wook looked at him for a moment. Then he walked down the corridor to the 2nd floor. Imani's light was on under the door. He knocked once. She opened it without hesitation, which meant she had heard the movement downstairs and had been waiting for it to reach her. She was fully dressed, not in the way of someone who had been expecting sleep, but in the way of someone who had been expecting this. She looked at his face and at the jacket he was wearing, and at the particular quality of readiness in how he was standing. You're going to him, she said. Yes, tonight. They know the source is gone. They're staging outside the perimeter right now. He held her eyes. If I wait for them to bring it here, I lose the terrain advantage. I need to get to Do-hwan on my ground, on my terms, before they decide the smartest move is coming through that fence. She was quiet for 2 seconds. What do I do? She asked. Stay in the house. Stay away from windows on the lower floors. Moojin has the estate covered. I'm leaving him here with full team. He paused. If anything changes, any sound, any movement outside, anything that doesn't feel right, you go to Sena's room and you stay there. You don't open the door for anyone, except Mujin's voice. Okay, I mean it, Imani. I know you mean it. Her voice was steady. I heard you. He looked at her standing in the doorway of her room, with her arms crossed over her chest and her chin level, and the thing that moved through him in that moment was not something he had vocabulary for. In English, or Korean, something found compound and sharp-edged that involved what she meant to him and what he stood to lose and the particular injustice of. Having found something worth protecting right at the moment when protecting it required walking away from it. I'll be back before morning, he said. I know. Don't say it like that, he said. Like it's something you have to convince yourself of. Something shifted in her face. Not soft exactly. Imani never went entirely soft, but the set of her shoulders changed slightly, and she looked at him with something she didn't bother to conceal. Then come back, she said. He held her eyes for one more second. Then he went downstairs. The convoy left the estate at 11:58, the decoy vehicle first, taking the main gate route toward the bay, drawing the eye of whatever Guryong positioning was watching the front approach. Ji-Wook went out the Eastern Service access 3 minutes later in a black SUV with 2 vehicles flanking, moving at normal speed, no urgency in the profile. The Hanyang Club was a private establishment on Sacramento that ran a legitimate members' dining room on its upper floors and managed its lower arrangements with the kind of discretion that required significant membership fees and longer memories. Ji-Wook had been a member for 9 years. The management knew his face and knew the kind of meeting he was requesting when he called ahead in the specific way he had called ahead tonight. Private room was ready when he arrived. He went in with 2 men and left 4 more in the corridor and the lobby. Baek Do-won was already seated. He was 53, lean in the way of a person who had always moved frequently, with close-cropped gray hair, and the hands of someone who had done physical work at some point in his past that his current role didn't require. He had a glass of water in front of him that he had not touched. He looked at Ji-Wook entering the room with the expression of a man who had been expecting a different configuration and was updating his assessment. Ji-Wook sat across from him. He placed the folder on the table between them. You know what that is, Ji-Wook said. Do-won looked at the folder. His eyes moved to Ji-Wook's face. I'd like to see it. Open it. Do-won opened the folder. He read the first page with the careful attention of someone verifying the scope of a problem before deciding how to respond to it. He turned to the second page. The third. He closed the folder and sat back. You've been thorough, he said. I always am. When the situation warrants it. How long have you had this? Ji-Wook kept his voice level, conversational, completely without heat. The heat was somewhere else behind his sternum, in the specific pressure of knowing what was in that folder, knowing Yi-Rin's name was in that folder. He kept it there. The source is gone. The communication pathway is burned. Whatever you were expecting to receive tonight, and going forward, that's finished. Do-hwan was quiet for a moment. And the source, he said carefully. What has happened there? That's not your concern. I'm asking because if he's alive, Ji-Wook said. He'll remain alive. What happens to him is my business, and it will be handled the way I handle my business. You don't have a voice in that. Do-hwan nodded slightly. He was recalculating. Ji-Wook could see it, the way the man's eyes went slightly inward while his surface maintained its composure. Assessing from the folder, assessing the personnel Ji-Wook had brought, assessing what tonight actually meant for Guryong's position. What do you want? Do-hwan asked. I want you to understand something very clearly, Ji-Wook said. Not as a negotiation, not as the beginning of a conversation about terms. I want you to understand it as a fixed fact. He leaned forward slightly, just enough. My daughter and the woman in my household are not instruments. They are not leverage. They are not variables in any operational calculation you run going forward. Do-hwan looked at him. Any surveillance, any approach. Any contact with either of them, from any Guryong-affiliated person, for any reason, Ji-Wook touched the folder. This goes to every party that has an interest in whether your organization continues to function in this city. The Sung Network. The 3 independent operators you currently maintain arrangements with in Oakland. The federal contact that Guryong has spent 6 years trying to identify inside my organization. He paused. I know who it is. That information is currently sealed. It stays sealed as long as the terms I'm describing are honored. The room was very quiet. Du-won's water glass sat untouched on the table. The man looked at Ji-Wook with the specific expression of someone who has just understood the actual scope of what they are facing and is determining whether there is a version of the next 60 seconds that does not involve complete capitulation. You came here with a lot of confidence for a man whose house is currently being watched by my people, Du-won said. Your people are watching a very well-covered property, Ji-Wook said. And I am sitting in a room that I chose, on ground that I have controlled for 9 years, with documentation that can end your organization's operational viability in this city. He held Du-won's eyes. You're welcome to test the confidence. A long silence. Du-won pressed 2 fingers flat against the table. A small gesture, something releasing. The surveillance on the property ends, he said. Tonight. Du-won's voice was even. The woman and the child, they won't be approached again. They won't be looked at, Ji-Wook said. They won't be discussed. They won't appear in any intelligence product your operation produces going forward. They cease to exist as points of interest, permanently. Du-won looked at him for a long moment. You understand, Du-won said, that this doesn't close everything between our organizations. I'm not asking you to close everything, Ji-Wook said. I'm drawing one line. Everything else we manage the way we've managed it for 6 years. He stood. But that line doesn't move. He picked up the folder. He left Du-won the copy. The drive back to the estate took 18 minutes. Ji-Wook sat in the back of the SUV with his phone in his hand and the folder on the seat beside him and the specific hollow quality of adrenaline, resolving not triumph, not relief exactly, but the decompression of a system that had been running at maximum load and is beginning to normalize. His phone lit up. Mu-jin, he answered immediately. The vehicles outside the perimeter are moving, Mu-jin said. Pulling back from all positions. How many? 3 confirmed. Checking on the 4th now. The service access? Clear, all clear, a pause. Whatever you said to him, he called it in fast. Good. Ji-Wook leaned back against the seat. Status inside? Quiet. Ms. Bellrose checked in with me 20 minutes ago. Sena is asleep. Everything is stable. I'll be there in 10 minutes. He ended the call. He looked out the SUV window at the city, moving past the streets wet from coastal fog, streetlights, doing that particular thing they did in San Francisco, where the light spread sideways through the mist and made everything look like it was slightly behind glass. He had lived in this city for 14 years. He had built something here that was layered and complex and expensive and occasionally beautiful in the way that powerful things can be accidentally beautiful. He had also lost something here that he was never going to fully recover. But sitting in the back of the car with the fog on the windows and the confirmation that the perimeter was clear and Sena was asleep, and Imani had checked in 20 minutes ago, he felt not peace exactly, but the edge of something adjacent to it. The recognition that tonight had not gone the way his enemies intended. That the line he had drawn was real and would hold. That he had protected them. The estate gate opened as the convoy approached, and he was through and out of the vehicle before it fully stopped and moving toward the front door when it opened and Imani was standing there. She had heard them come through the gate. She had been watching. She looked at him, at all of him, the quick inventory that people run when someone they've been waiting for finally returns, and they need to confirm what they're seeing matches what they hoped. He was intact. He was upright. He was looking back at her. Something in her shoulders came down. Done? She asked. Done, he said. She stepped back to let him inside, and they stood in the entryway, in a way that was different from the silence of absence. It was the quiet, of things settled, of a particular kind of threat having receded, and even the air in the entryway seemed to register the difference. Mu-jin said the vehicles left, she said. They did. All of them. All of them. She nodded. Then she exhaled a real one, the kind she'd probably been holding at partial capacity for 31 hours. And it made her look, briefly, exactly as tired as she actually was. Go sleep, he said. She looked at him. You should too. I know. Neither of them moved immediately. Ji-Wook, she said. Thank you. She said it simply, without decoration. for handling it, for all of it. He looked at her in the entryway light. I told you I would, he said. I know you did. A pause. Still want to say thank you. He nodded. She went up the stairs. Stood in the entryway for a moment longer, listening to the house breathe around him, the security system's quiet operational hum, the coastal wind moving against the west-facing windows, the complete and absolute silence from Sena's room above. Then he went to his office, because there was still work to complete, and Moo-jin would need the debrief, and sitting still right now felt like something he hadn't yet earned. Moo-jin was waiting. They worked until 3 in the morning, the debrief, the documentation of the evening, the formal record of Do-won's verbal commitments, and the supporting materials that would be held in reserve. Moo-jin was thorough and precise and said very little that wasn't operational, which was what the situation required. When they finished, Moo-jin began closing his files, and Ji-Wook said, "Ro." Moo-jin looked up. "I've been thinking about what he said," Ji-Wook said. "About his son. The operation in Busan. I want to review the file. The original incident report." Ji-Wook's voice was even. "I want to understand exactly what happened, and whether my office was informed of the outcome for the people who were exposed to." Moo-jin was quiet for a moment. "That may be a difficult file." "Most accurate things are." Ji-Wook met his eyes. "Get it for me." "Yes." And Ji-Wook stopped, pressed his thumb and forefinger against the bridge of his nose. "What he did cannot be. There is no arrangement that makes what he did to Yi-rin acceptable. That is not a thing I will arrive at. I know. But I want to understand how an 8-year man gets to that point." He dropped his hand. "Because I apparently missed it entirely. And I cannot afford to keep missing things of that scale." Moo-jin nodded slowly. "I'll pull the Busan file." Ji-Wook stood. He was almost to the door when Moo-jin said, "It was well handled tonight. What you did in that room with Do-won." A pause. "Yi-rin would have." He stopped himself. "She would have told me I took too long getting there," Ji-Wook said. His voice was rough at the edge of it. "She had opinions about my pacing on most things." Moo-jin made a short sound that was almost a laugh. "Grief some sleep," Ji-Wook said. He went upstairs. He was passing the door to his bedroom when he stopped. Then he walked past it, down the corridor, to Sena's room. He opened the door quietly. The security man posted outside, nodded and stood in the doorway for a moment. Sena was completely unconscious, arms flung wide in the self-conscious abandon of a child who sleeps as hard as she does everything else. The stuffed rabbit was wedged under her chin. The lavender was faint in the air. Ji-Wook stood there for 2 minutes, just looking at her. Then he closed the door softly and went back to his room and sat on the edge of the bed in the dark. He sat there for a while. He thought about Yi-rin, about the morning, about the finger-raised weight, while he finished a sentence he could no longer remember. About the way she had shaken her head with that fond, irritated expression and walked out in his household, had already decided would be her last. He thought about Park Ro, 51 years old, with a son broken in the machinery, and a father who had knocked on doors and been handed money. He thought about Do-won's hands flat on the table. The moment the calculation resolved, he thought about Imani in the entryway, shoulders coming down, the real exhale of 31 hours releasing. He lay back on the bed without removing his jacket. He was asleep in 4 minutes, which was the fastest he had fallen asleep in close to 14 months, and he did not dream. Morning arrived with the particular quality of coastal light that came through the estate's east-facing windows in late autumn, low amber, spreading slowly across surfaces in a way that softened everything it touched. Ji-Wook woke at 6:42 with his jacket still on, and the specific clarity of a person who has slept without interruption for the first time in a long time. He showered. He changed. He went downstairs. The kitchen was already occupied. Sena was at the table with a bowl of cereal she had poured herself, approximately a third of which was on the table, rather than in the bowl, engaged in what appeared to be a detailed one-sided conversation with the stuffed rabbit, propped against the sugar jar. Imani was at the counter, making coffee with her back to the room, moving with the unhurried ease of someone who had slept and was functional and was not currently managing an active emergency for the first time in days. Sena looked up when he came in. "Appa," she said. Rabbit says you were loud last night. Rabbit should be asleep at that hour, Ji-Wook said. Rabbit has insomnia, Sena said seriously. Like you. He looked at Imani's back and could see from the slight adjustment in her posture that she was suppressing a laugh. He sat at the table. Sena immediately relocated herself and the rabbit to the chair beside him and continued the cereal bowl conversation, now including Ji-Wook's arrival as new plot development. He listened and occasionally responded, dosed, and ate toast that appeared in front of him, placed there by Imani without ceremony, without comment, the way people who have achieved a certain domestic fluency do things for each other. When Sena was finished and had disappeared upstairs to organize herself for the day, Ji-Wook sat at the kitchen table with his second cup of coffee and Imani sat across from him. Mujin gave me a full briefing this morning, she said. I know, I asked him to. The vehicles are gone. Yes. All the surveillance points the market, the school route. Gone. Yes. She wrapped both hands around her mug. How long will it hold? Ji-Wook looked at her. Long enough for me to make permanent arrangements. He paused. The documentation I used with Du Huan remains sealed as long as the terms are honored. That's leverage that doesn't expire. It gives them an ongoing reason to comply. Ongoing meaning, as long as they want to operate in this city. Imani nodded slowly. She looked at her coffee. And Ro? Ji-Wook was quiet for a moment. He is being held. What follows will be handled inside my organization's own processes. He met her eyes. I told you I wouldn't describe what that means. I know she didn't push it. Was he involved in Yi-Rin's death? Not indirectly. Was he the cause? The question had a precise edge to it, the difference between the mechanics of something and the moral weight of it, and Imani had always been accurate about that distinction. He provided the information that made it possible, Ji-Wook said. Whether that constitutes the cause depends on which analysis you apply. Which analysis do you apply? He held her gaze. The one that holds him responsible. She nodded. Outside, the morning patrol completed its circuit. Gravel soft and familiar, and currently the sound of a perimeter that was clear. Sena needs to know, Imani said, about her mother. Not everything, not the names, not the details, but the truth of it, that it wasn't an accident. She held his eyes steadily. She's 7, not 4. She will hold things together better than you think if you give her the truth in the right shape. And she will be far less okay if she finds it out on her own later. Ji-Wook looked at her. I know, he said. You've known for a while. Yes. Then what's stopping you? He looked at the kitchen table. At the sugar jar, with the rabbit still propped against it, where Sena had left it. At the cereal bowl still on the table because 7-year-olds have a highly selective relationship with clearing up after themselves. She looks at me, he said, the way children look at parents when the story they've been given still makes sense. When the world is still the shape they were told it was. He stopped. Once I tell her that shape changes, she won't look at the world the same way again. I know that's inevitable. I know she deserves the truth. I know. He paused. I'm not ready to be the one who ends her version of it. Imani was quiet for a moment. You're not ending her world, she said. You're trusting her with reality. There's a difference. A pause. And she doesn't have to carry it alone. You'll be there. I'll be there, that matters. Ji-Wook looked at her across the kitchen table. I'll be there, said without condition, without a qualifier about the nature of her role or the terms of her continued presence. Simply there, as a fact, as something she was stating because it was true and therefore worth stating. He understood, something in that moment, that he had been understanding incrementally for weeks, in the way that the largest things arrive not all at once, but in accumulated weight, each moment adding to the previous until the total becomes undeniable. Imani, he said. She looked at him. He didn't finish the sentence. Not because he didn't have it. He had it, clearly. Every word of it, but because the kitchen was full of morning light and Sena's cereal bowl was still on the table, and somewhere upstairs a 7-year-old was having a complex logistical discussion with her wardrobe, and the moment felt like something that required more room than a kitchen table, and a second cup of coffee, and 31 hours of adrenaline recently resolved. Tonight, he said instead, I need to tell you something tonight. She looked at him steadily. Okay, when Sena is asleep. Okay, she said again, The word was simple and complete, and she said it the way she said the things that mattered, without flinching, without filling the space around it with noise. He nodded. He pushed back from the table. He had work to do. Mujin needed the Busan file review. The documentation protocols for Duhuan's commitments needed formalizing. There were 3 legitimate business matters that had accumulated during the past week of operational focus that required his actual attention. He was almost to the kitchen doorway when Sena came thundering down the back stairs in her school uniform, with one sock on and one sock in her hand, and announced at full volume that she could not find her other shoe, had not lost it, and believed strongly that the shoe had relocated itself without her involvement. Ji-Wook looked at the one-sock child making this declaration with the specific intensity she brought to all declarations. He looked back at Imani. She was already moving toward the stairs with the patient inevitability of someone who has accepted that the search for missing footwear is a fundamental condition of the current stage of life. "Check under the craft table," Imani said over her shoulder. "Second time this week." "I didn't put it there," Sena said, following. "I know you didn't," Imani said. "The shoe moved itself," Sena said. "Shoes do that," Imani said, very unreliable. Their voices faded up the stairs. Ji-Wook stood in the kitchen doorway for a moment longer. The morning light came through the east-facing windows exactly as it always had. The sugar jar sat on the counter with the rabbit propped against it. The cereal bowl was still on the table. He went to his office. He worked until early afternoon, and the work came with a clarity it hadn't had in months. Decisions that needed making, made, documents that needed signing, signed. The operational architecture of the evening's events translated into the formal record that protected his position going forward. He moved through it methodically and precisely, and without the grinding quality that had characterized everything for nearly a year. Mujin arrived at 2 with the Busan file. It was worse than Ji-Wook had expected, which was saying something, because he had expected it to be bad. The incident report was complete and accurate and contained, at its end, a section titled Follow-up Actions that had been marked completed with a single notation: financial settlement offered and accepted. 3 names, 3 outcomes. The financial settlements were logged. There was no record of who had made the decision. There was no record of whether anyone at Ji-Wook's level had reviewed the outcome. There was a strong probability, reading it with the clarity of the present, that Ji-Wook had never seen this specific document. He sat with this for a long time. "I didn't see this," he said finally. "Almost certainly not," Mujin said carefully. "It was processed below your review threshold. Standard operational closure. 3 people broken in our machinery," Ji-Wook said. "Processed below my review threshold." He closed the file. "Who made the decision on the settlements?" Mujin named a former operations manager who had since left the organization. Ji-Wook nodded slowly. "I want a full audit," he said. "Every operational closure in the past 10 years that involved personnel outcomes below my review threshold. Every settlement, every follow-up notation." He looked at Mujin. "If there are more Park Rows in those files, men who knocked on doors and got handed money and got handed nothing else, I want to know before they tell someone else." Mujin held his gaze. "That's a significant undertaking." "I know what it is," Ji-Wook said. "Do it." By late afternoon, the estate had settled into its ordinary rhythm, Sena's after-school energy, filling the rooms in the specific way it did, moving from the kitchen to the craftbowl to the garden and back, trailing projects and questions, and occasional demands for Ji-Wook's opinion on things that required no particular expertise, but clearly required his specific input. He gave it, all of it. He sat on the garden bench while Sena showed him the painting she had decided to redo after reconsidering the fish versus bird situation, and he looked at the painting with genuine attention. And when she asked which version he preferred, he told her the truth, which was the bird, and she informed him he had poor artistic taste, and he accepted this. Imani sat Tang nearby, watching, with an expression he was getting better at reading something quiet and present, the look of a person who is exactly where they choose to be. After dinner, after the bath, after the rabbit and the 3 pages exactly 3, Sena was immovable on this, and after the room settled, and Sena's breathing went deep, and even Ji-Wook came downstairs and found the kitchen lit with the low, warm light. Imani was already there, not dancing, just sitting at the table with her hands around a mug, waiting, in the way she had been willing to wait for things that mattered without making the waiting feel like pressure. He sat across from her. The kitchen was quiet. The radio was off tonight. Outside, the perimeter was clear, and the coast wind moved against the windows, and somewhere on the grounds the patrol completed its circuit. "You said tonight," she said. "I did." He looked at her across the table, at the woman who had come into his house with 2 suitcases, and given his daughter her laugh back, and sat with him in the dark, without making it strange. Who had been made a target by people who understood, before he fully admitted it himself, how much she had come to matter. Who had stood in a grocery store with a man who smiled without warmth and pressed the emergency contact, and refused to give him anything. Who had said, "I'll be there," without a qualifier. He had been trying to find the right configuration of words for weeks. He gave up looking for the right configuration and said the true one. "I love you," Ji-Wook said. "I have been trying not to say it for longer than is probably reasonable, and I have no interest in continuing to not say it." He held her eyes. "You came into this house and you made it possible for Sena to be herself again, and you made it possible for me to be something. Some version of myself that I thought I had lost access to permanently." He paused. "What happened to Yi-Rin is not something I will stop carrying. But carrying it alone was making me into a smaller and more controlled version of a person, and I don't think that's what she would have wanted, and I know it's not what I want." Another pause. "I don't know exactly what this looks like going forward. I know the world you'd be stepping into, and I know it's complicated and occasionally dangerous, even after last night. I know I'm asking something significant." He stopped. Imani was looking at him with the expression that revealed what she chose to reveal. She was choosing to reveal quite a lot right now. "You're not asking anything yet," she said quietly. "You're telling me how you feel." "Yes," he said. "So let me tell you how I feel," she said. The kitchen was completely still. Outside, something shifted in the wind, the coast weather doing what it did in late autumn, the mist pressing closer, the darkness beyond the windows soft and complete. Imani set down her mug and looked at Ji-Wook across the table with the full, unguarded attention of a woman who had decided something a while ago and had been waiting with the patience that was characteristic of everything she did for the moment to say it. "I love you too," she said. The words arrived simply, the way she said everything that mattered, because it was true and therefore worth saying. She opened her mouth to continue, and then every light in the house went out. Not a gradual fail, not a circuit trip. Complete and instantaneous darkness, the security monitors, the kitchen light, the perimeter floods, the motion sensors on the fence line, everything. Simultaneously gone. Ji-Wook was on his feet before the dark finished arriving. One hand already on the table for orientation, his voice sharp and immediate. "Get down," he said. "Get down and stay down." His phone was in his hand. He hit Mu-Jin's contact. Nothing, no connection. The signal was dead. From somewhere outside the west fence, very close, came a sound that was not the wind, and was not the patrol, and was not anything the perimeter was supposed to allow. Ji-Wook reached across the dark table and found Imani's arm and pulled her to the floor, and put himself between her and the west-facing windows, and his voice was absolutely level when he said into the darkness of his own kitchen in his own house that was supposed to be clear, that Do-won had confirmed was clear, that Mu-Jin had confirmed 3 times was clear. "They didn't leave," he said. The darkness was not silent. That was the first thing. Ji-Wook registered. The darkness had sound inside it. Not the sounds of the house. The sounds of people moving through the property with the deliberate minimized footfall of men who had trained for this specific kind of entry. He could hear it through the west-facing kitchen wall, the way you hear things when sensory input has been stripped away, and your ears become the only instrument of available. 2 points of movement, maybe 3. The service entrance side. Scene. They had cut the power from outside, which meant they had gotten close enough to the property's electrical infrastructure to touch it, which meant the perimeter had already been breached before the lights went out. Before the signal died, before the patrol completed its last circuit, or failed to complete it. His hand was on Imani's arm, and she was down, and he was between her and the windows, and his phone was dead in his other hand, and somewhere above them, Sena was asleep in the dark. "Stay here," he said. His voice was barely above breath. "Ji-Wook, I mean it." He put his hand flat on her shoulder for 1 second firm, present a physical statement rather than a verbal one. Then he moved. He knew this house in complete darkness, the way you know the geography of a place you have inhabited for years with your body rather than your mind. Kitchen counter was 3 steps right. The drawer beside the range was 12 inches from the corner. He moved to it without touching anything he didn't intend to touch, and opened it and took out the secondary phone, a burner, charge kept since Moo-jin had begun logging the surveillance 3 weeks ago. Moo-jin's instruction. Ji-Wook had not asked why at the time. He called Moo-jin. It connected on the first ring. "I know," Moo-jin said immediately. "I've got a man down at the service access. They came through the drainage easement on the south side. We missed it. I have 2 teams repositioning now. How many inside the perimeter?" "Unknown. At least 3, possibly 5. They have communications jamming on the primary system. Working around it. 2 minutes. I don't have 2 minutes. Where are you?" "East Garden. 70 seconds from your position." Ji-Wook was already moving back toward Imani. "Service entrance side. They're on the west wall. I need you at the kitchen access door in 60 seconds. He ended the call. In the darkness, Imani found his arm before he found hers. She had not stayed where he told her to stay, which he would address later. She had moved to the kitchen doorway and was pressed against the wall beside it, with both hands flat against the plaster, and her breathing controlled in the way of a person managing fear rather than being managed by it. "Sena," she said, 1 word, "I know." He put the burner in her hand. "Moo-jin. Speed dial 1. If anyone comes through any door in this house that isn't me or Moo-jin, you call and you run for Sena's room and you lock the door and you do not open it." "Where are you going?" "To make sure they don't get past the ground floor." She grabbed his wrist in the dark. Her grip was strong. "Don't be stupid about this. I'm never stupid about this. You're the most controlled person I've ever met, and you are also completely capable of being stupid about this," she said. "Come back to us." He found her face in the dark with one hand, a brief, direct contact, the side of her face, his thumb at her cheekbone. 1 second. "Go upstairs," he said. He heard her move toward the stairs. He moved toward the west wall. The kitchen access door was a service entry that connected the house to the covered walkway leading toward the garage, and beyond it, the utility structures at the property's west edge. Ji-Wook reached it and put his back to the wall beside it and listened. Close. Very close. The sound of something being applied to the exterior of the door, not a key, not the electronic panel. Something mechanical. They were bypassing the lock physically. He had approximately 8 seconds. The door came open. The first man through was moving fast and low, and had a tactical light that swept the room immediately. And Ji-Wook was not in the sweep, because he had placed himself at the hinge side of the door, where the light couldn't reach, without the man rotating fully. He let the rotation begin, measured it, and moved. The fight was not the way it appeared in any visual medium Ji-Wook had encountered. It was close and graceless and expensive. The first man went down, but not quietly, and not before his elbow caught Ji-Wook across the side of the jaw, with enough force to detonate a white burst across his vision and make the floor feel temporarily unreliable. Ji-Wook went to 1 knee and came back up, because going to 2 knees was the end of a fight, and this was not over. The second man was already through the door. From the east garden access behind Ji-Wook, the kitchen's back door opened and Moo-jin came through with 2 of his men, and the next 30 seconds were noise and impact, and the specific physical brutality of a close-quarters engagement in darkness, which is nothing like a controlled operation, and everything like 2 sets of human beings in a small space doing damage to each other with whatever is immediately available. When it ended, Ji-Wook was standing with his back against the kitchen counter, with blood from his lip running down his chin and 3 men from Guryong on the kitchen floor. Moo-jin had a cut above his eye that was bleeding into his vision, and he kept pressing the back of his hand against it with the irritated efficiency of someone who finds the blood inconvenient rather than alarming. "Count," Ji-Wook said. 3 here, 2 more outside my team has them. Mu-jin looked around the kitchen. I think that's the full unit, you think. I'm running confirmation now. Ji-Wook was already moving toward the stairs. The power came back on as he reached the 2nd floor, landing Mu-jin's people, restoring the connection from the exterior box, and the sudden return of light made the hallway feel briefly surreal, ordinary and bright, entirely inconsistent with the 8 seconds that had just preceded it. He went directly to Sena's door. It was locked. He knocked twice. Imani, a pause. Then the lock clicked, and the door opened and Imani was in the doorway, with Sena pressed against her side, the child's face buried in Imani's waist, both arms wrapped around her. The stuffed rabbit somehow clutched in Sena's fist, despite the darkness and the movement and everything else. Imani looked at Ji-Wook's face, at the blood, at the fact that he was standing upright and present and intact enough to have climbed a flight of stairs without assistance. Done? She asked. The same word as last night, different weight behind it. Done, he said. Sena's face came away from Imani's waist and looked up at her father. Her eyes were wide and very awake, and she had the expression of a child who is frightened and is also engaged in a fierce internal argument about whether to show it. The lights went off, Sena said. They did, Ji-Wook said. And there were sounds. Yes. Are the sounds done? Ji-Wook crouched down to her level. He looked at his daughter's face, at the fierce, specific, non-negotiable face of this 7-year-old person who had survived a year of grief and returned to herself, and who was going to be. Ji-Wook understood with the particular certainty of things you know in the body before the mind processes them, a formidable human being. The sounds are done, he said. Sena assessed this. Then she looked at the blood on his face with the clinical interest of a child, cataloging new information. You're bleeding, she said, a little. Does it hurt? Not much. She considered him for another moment. Then she held out the stuffed rabbit. Rabbit helps, she said seriously. Something shifted in Ji-Wook's chest that had nothing to do with the evening's physical damage. He took the rabbit and held it for a moment, and then gave it back. Rabbit helped, he said. Thank you, he stood. He looked at Imani over Sena's head. She was looking back at him with an expression that was trying to manage several things at once, relief and residual, fear, and something softer underneath both of them, and not quite succeeding at keeping all of them in their separate compartments. Can you stay with her? He asked. Yes, Imani said. Go. He went. The next 4 hours were operational. Mu-jin coordinated the removal of the 5 Guryong men from the property with the kind of logistics that did not involve police or public documentation. Ji-Wook's legal counsel was called. 3 phone calls were made to contacts within Guryong's wider organizational network, not to Do-won, who had apparently authorized tonight's operation in direct contradiction of what he had agreed to in that private room, but to people above Do-hwan in the structure. People who had larger interests at stake than a single night's gambit. The conversation with those people was different from the conversation with Do-won. It was shorter and its consequences were more specific, because Ji-Wook was speaking to people who understood that the documentation in his possession was not a threat but a mechanism, and that the mechanism had been designed to function automatically if Ji-Wook was no longer in a position to prevent it. Do-hwan was removed from his operational role before morning. The withdrawal of Guryong from every position related to the Han household was confirmed through 3 independent channels before dawn. This time, Mu-jin told Ji-Wook it would hold. How do you know? Ji-Wook asked. Because Do-hwan was operating outside his authorization, Mu-jin said. Tonight was his initiative, not organizational policy. When he agreed to your terms in that room and then sent 5 men through your drainage easement, 8 hours later, he was running his own agenda. The people above him didn't sanction it. A pause. They're not happy with him, and they're not going to risk what you're holding to rehabilitate a man who cost them this kind of exposure. He'll be dealt with inside their structure. Yes. And the territorial arrangement stands. They want stability more than they want to win this specific engagement. The people at that level always prefer stable and operational to victorious and exposed. Ji-Wook sat in his office with the first light coming through the east window and Mu-jin across the desk, and the specific exhaustion of a night that had required things from him that left marks. His jaw was swollen, where the elbow had connected. His lip had stopped bleeding somewhere during the operational phone calls and had dried to a dark line at the corner of his mouth. He was aware of both in the way you become aware of physical damage when the adrenaline has finished its work and the body sends in its accounting. The 5 men, Ji-Wook said. Handled. Off the property and out of the city by morning. He nodded. Get some sleep, Ji-Wook said. After you, Mu-jin said. He left. Ji-Wook sat alone in the office as the light grew. He thought about Do-hwan in that room, saying the vehicles would pull back, saying the woman and the child would not be approached, and then 9 hours later, sending men through the drainage easement on the south side of the property. He thought about the gap between agreement and intention, the way some people used words as instruments of delay, rather than commitment, buying time while the real operation was already in motion. He had believed the terms would hold, because he had presented leverage. That should have made compliance rational. He had been right about the leverage. He had miscalculated the man. Park Row had been a miscalculation he'd carried for 8 years. Baek Do-hwan had been a miscalculation he'd caught within hours. He sat with both of these, the way you sit with the evidence of your own fallibility, when it has come close enough to cost you something irreplaceable. Not self-punishment. Self-punishment was useless, and he had never been drawn to useless things. But accountability, the kind that says, this is what I missed. This is why I missed it. This is the adjustment required going forward. He made himself look at both failures directly. Then he closed the mental file. He went upstairs. Sena's door was open. Both of them were asleep inside Sena in her bed, in the complete abandonment posture, one arm hanging off the side, the stuffed rabbit reclaimed and tucked under her. Imani was in the armchair by the window, her feet tucked under her head tilted slightly against the chair's side. Asleep with the quality of someone who finally released the last hour's worth of vigilance and let the body take what it needed. Ji-Wook stood in the doorway for a moment. He didn't wake either of them. He went to his room and slept for 4 hours, and this time he did dream not of Yi-rin's last morning, not of the raised finger and the door closing. He dreamed something he couldn't hold on to after waking, something that left behind only the residue of warmth, like a room you've left that was well heated. 3 days passed before Ji-Wook spoke to Sena. He spent those 3 days making arrangements operational, legal, structural. The security protocols were rebuilt from the perimeter inward, with Mu-jin's oversight eliminating every access point the drainage easement breach had revealed. The household staff was reviewed individually, not with suspicion, but with the thoroughness of someone who had learned that trust required maintenance rather than assumption. 2 people were transitioned out for reasons unrelated to loyalty, simply the recognition that proximity to the household's more volatile elements required a specific kind of professional resilience that not everyone possessed. The Busan file audit began. Ji-Wook reviewed the first batch of outcomes himself. Splitting. It was slow and uncomfortable work, the kind of accounting that a younger version of himself would have delegated to avoid the full weight of what the numbers meant. He did not delegate it. He sat with each file and each settlement notation and each marked completed follow-up and built the full picture of what his machinery had cost, over 10 years of operational losses below his review threshold. When the audit was complete, he would establish a process. He didn't know yet exactly what form it would take. He knew it would be different from what had existed before, and he knew it would require him to see things he had previously allowed to pass unseen, which was costly in a particular way, not financially, but in the specific currency of being the person who knows. He accepted this. On the 4th morning, he found Sena in the garden after breakfast, sitting on the bench with her sketchbook, drawing something that appeared to involve both a fish and a bird in some kind of collaborative arrangement. He sat beside her. She continued drawing for a moment, then looked up at him. "You have a bruise," she said, "I know. It's yellow now. It was purple before. Yellow is better. Is it healing?" "Yes." She considered this satisfactory and returned to her drawing. He sat with her in the morning light and watched her work, The serious concentration of a child making something. The way she erased and redrew the bird's wing twice, because it wasn't right the first time or the second time, but she was going to keep at it. Sena, he said, I need to tell you something about your mom. The pencil slowed. She didn't stop drawing entirely, but her movements became smaller and more careful, the body's way of preparing to listen while maintaining some forward motion. Okay, she said. He had thought about how to begin this. Had rehearsed several versions, discarded each for different reasons. In the end, he began with the truth, which was the only place worth starting. The accident that took her, he said. It wasn't exactly an accident. Sena's pencil stopped. She looked up at him, with her mother's eyes, the shape of them, the particular attentiveness in them, when something was being said that required full reception. What does that mean? She asked. Her voice was small but even. It means some people made a bad choice that hurt your mom. They made it because they were in a conflict with our family, and they made a wrong decision. He kept his voice steady and direct, without softening it into abstraction. It wasn't her fault. It wasn't an accident of the car. Someone made it happen. Sena was very still. Why didn't you tell me before? She asked. Because I was trying to protect you from something heavy, he said. And I was wrong to make that decision by myself. I should have told you sooner, in a way you could manage, instead of waiting until it became too long to wait. She looked at her sketchbook, at the fish and the bird that hadn't resolved themselves yet. Are the people who did it in trouble? She asked. Yes, he said. They are. Are they going to hurt anyone else in our family? He held her eyes. No. I made sure of it. She processed this with the seriousness she brought to everything that mattered. A minute passed. Maybe more. A bird moved through the garden, a real one, not the kind in the sketchbook, and she tracked it briefly before bringing her gaze back to her father. I knew something was wrong, she said quietly. Not what? Just that there was something everyone wasn't saying. I know, he said. You're very perceptive. Mom said that too. Her voice had something in it at the edges. She said I noticed everything. She was right. Sena's chin moved slightly. The battle happening in her face was visible, and not hidden. She was not trying to hide it, which was one of the ways she was unlike him, and better for it. I miss her a lot, Sena said. I know, he said. I do too. Every day? Every day. She looked at him for a moment with those eyes. Imani says that missing someone is how you know they mattered, Sena said. She says it hurts because the love has nowhere to go. Ji-Wook held very still. Imani is right, he said. Sena nodded slowly, accepting this as confirmation of something she had already filed somewhere internal. Then she looked back at her sketchbook and picked up her pencil again. Can you stay here for a while? She asked. Yes, he said. As long as you want, she drew. He sat beside her. The garden was quiet, and the morning light was the color of things that have lasted, and neither of them spoke for a long time, and the silence was not the kind that needs to be filled. Eventually Sena said, without looking up, Does Imani know? About Mom? She knows. Good, Sena said. She's good at knowing things. Better when she knows. Ji-Wook looked at his daughter. Yes, he said. It is. 2 weeks after that morning in the garden, Ji-Wook did something he had not done in close to 2 years. He asked Mujin to clear his afternoon schedule fully, all of it, no call-outs, and he told Mrs. Park there would be 3 for dinner, and he wanted the kitchen left free. Then he went to find Imani. She was in the small study off the library, reading something with the focused containment of a person who has claimed a piece of territory and established productive relations with it. She looked up when he appeared in the doorway. Your afternoon is clear, he said. She marked her page. Is something wrong? No. She studied him for a moment with that accuracy. Then what? I don't have an agenda, he said. It cost him something. He was not a person who moved easily in unstructured time. I thought. He stopped. I would like to spend the afternoon with you. Without an emergency. Without a briefing. Without something that requires management. He paused. I'm aware that sounds simple, and I'm aware it isn't. For me, actually simple. Imani looked at him for a moment. Then she set her book down and stood. See, keen. They walked the property grounds for the first time, without either of them being conscious of the perimeter, just the grounds, the way the coastal light moved across the garden in the afternoon, the smell of the ocean over the fence line. They talked about things that had nothing to do with the past several weeks. She told him about a book she had been reading, not the one just now, but an older one she'd been thinking about. Something about memory and inherited grief, written by someone she'd found through her mother's reading list. He told her about the year he had spent in Busan, at 17, not the version he'd told her in the kitchen weeks ago, but a longer one. More specific, the particular light off the harbor in winter. The way the city sounded different, at 5 in the morning when the fish markets were opening, and the rest of the world hadn't woken yet. She listened to the Busan story with the full-body quality of her attention. "You were lonely there," she said when he finished. "I was 17 and didn't know anyone, and my Korean was technically correct, but socially wrong," he said. "Yes. Was it also good?" He thought about this honestly. "Yes. In the way that lonely things are sometimes also clarifying." She looked at the garden wall. "My first year after my mother died was like that. Lonely, in a way that was also I understood, things I hadn't understood before. About what I actually needed, about what was worth the effort, and what I'd been doing because it was expected. What did you understand about what you actually needed?" She glanced at him sideways. "People who tell the truth. That's mostly it. People who say the real thing instead of the managed version." A pause. "I grew up around a lot of managed versions. Your father?" "Among others." He nodded. They stopped at the eastern edge of the garden, where a stone bench sat under the old Monterey cypress that had been on the property since before Ji-Wook bought it. They sat. The afternoon light was doing the thing it did in October, coming in at an angle that made shadows long and amber and specific. "I want to talk about what comes next," Ji-Wook said. "Okay, not today. Not as a decision that needs to be made immediately." He turned to look at her. "But I want you to know that I'm thinking about it with seriousness. What the household looks like, what your role in it looks like. Whether what I said to you in the kitchen the other night is something you want to build into a structure, or whether it's something you want to keep more undefined." He paused. "I'm not good at undefined. I want to be honest about that." "I know you're not good at undefined," she said. "I've watched you organize a criminal emergency with the same energy most people organize a grocery list." He looked at her. The corner of her mouth moved. "I'm not mocking you," she said. "I'm saying I know who you are. The structure is part of who you are. And part of why Sena feels safe with you is that the structure is real. It's not performed. You're not pretending to be steady. You actually are." She looked at her hands. "I don't need you to be different than you are." Something in Ji-Wook's chest moved. "But," she said. "There's a but. There's a small one." She looked at him. "I am not going to be something that fits neatly into the existing structure. I have my own shape and my own needs and my own way of doing things, and if we're going to build something, it has to have room in it for both of those." She held his gaze. "I need you to be able to say when you're wrong, not just know it internally." "Say it. I said it to Sena," he said. "I know. And to you. About the 6 days. I know." A pause. "I'm not saying you can't do it. I'm saying I need it to stay being something you do. Even when it's costly." He held her gaze steadily. "That's fair," he said. "It is." She agreed. The afternoon sat around them, the cypress moving slightly in the coastal wind, the light shifting on the garden stones, the sounds of the property in its ordinary October rhythm. "I also need to keep dancing," she said, the faintest edge of something in her voice. Not teasing exactly. Something more private than that. Ji-Wook looked at her. "I wasn't planning to suggest you stop," he said. "Good." She looked at her hands again. "Because it's still mine. Whatever it means for me and my mother, and what I do with sadness when it needs somewhere to go. I'm not giving that up. I know what that is to you," he said. "I'm the last person who would ask you to give it up." She was quiet for a moment. "You could always just come into the kitchen," she said. Instead of standing in the hallway, he let that sit for a second. "I'll consider it," he said. She laughed, the real one, the one that tripped over itself, and it went through the garden and up into the cypress branches, and the afternoon received it the way good afternoons receive fat laughter, without comment, without requiring anything back. That evening, Ji-Wook cooked dinner. He was not a skilled cook and made no claim to being one. But he had one dish, a simple Korean jjigae, that his mother had taught him in the years, before she decided he was old enough to stop needing to learn practical things that he could execute with reasonable competence. He made it now in his impractical kitchen, with Mrs. Park diplomatically absent and Sena installed on the counter to provide running commentary on the proceedings. Imani sat at the kitchen table with a glass of water and occasionally intervened when Sena's commentary became constructive criticism directed at Ji-Wook's technique. "She said you're cutting the tofu wrong," Imani said. "She's 7, Ji-Wook said. "She might still be right," Imani said. "She's right," Sena confirmed. Ji-Wook looked at the tofu. He looked at Sena. He cut the next piece her way, which was admittedly more even. "Fine," he said. Sena appeared deeply satisfied. They ate at the kitchen table, all 3 of them, which was not the formal dining room and not the arrangement any of their job descriptions or household protocols had described when the year began. Sena ate approximately 2/3 of what was in her bowl and conducted a review of Ji-Wook's cooking that was thorough and balanced, acknowledging the tofu as well executed while identifying the broth as needing further development. "You sound like a restaurant critic," Imani told her. "What's that?" "Someone who writes about food for a living." "It's a job?" Sena looked genuinely astonished. "It's a job." Sena looked at Ji-Wook. "I want that job." "You can have it," he said. After dinner, after the dishes, after Sena had installed herself in the sitting room with the craft table and her current project, an ambitious map of a fictional island that had been in development for 11 days, Ji-Wook and Imani stood together at the kitchen sink in the particular companionable proximity of people who have arrived without quite marking the moment at a domestic ease that belongs only to the people who have earned it. "The jjigae was good," Imani said. She was drying a pot. "The broth needs work." "The broth was fine." "Sena's a tough critic." "She is." He passed her the next pot. "She gets it from her mother." Yirin had opinions about everything and was correct about most of them, and had no interest in softening either fact. Imani smiled, not the kind of smile that fills a gap, the kind that arrives, because something lands true. "She sounds like someone worth knowing," Imani said. She was. Ji-Wook's voice was even. Not locked away even. Not managed even. Simply even. The way things sound when they have found their level. "She would have had opinions about you. Good or bad." He thought about this, genuinely. "She would have decided quickly," he said. "She did everything quickly, and she would have decided you were real," which was her highest category. Imani held the pot she was drying for a moment, without moving. "I'll take that," she said quietly. They finished the dishes. The evening had that quality that good evenings have, not dramatic, not constructed, simply present, in the way that the best things are present, fully, without effort, without the sense that it is about to end. Sena appeared in the kitchen doorway at 8:15 with her island map and a specific grievance about the coastline of the fictional island's eastern region, which she presented to both adults simultaneously. They reviewed it. Imani suggested a bay, where there was currently a cliff. Ji-Wook was assigned the task of labeling the island's mountain range in Korean because it would, Sena explained, add authenticity. He wrote the labels. They were, Sena decided, acceptable. Then it was the bath, the pajamas, the rabbit. The 3 pages Sena was immovable and the room settling and the breathing going deep. Ji-Wook sat on the edge of the bed until Sena was under, and when he rose to leave, Sena's hand caught his wrist. "Appa," she said, half asleep. Are we okay? Like us? Our family?" He sat back down. "Yes," he said. "We're okay. Imani too?" "Imani too. Is she going to stay?" Ji-Wook looked at his daughter's face, the heavy-lidded, almost asleep face of a child who has put in a full day of being 7 years old and is only barely conscious enough to ask the question she apparently needed to ask before she could fully let go. "Yes, she's going to stay." Sena exhaled. "Good," she said. "The house is better when she's in it." She was asleep in 90 seconds. Ji-Wook sat there for another minute in the dark. Then he went downstairs. The kitchen was lit with the low, warm light, the overhead one, not the bright, functional one. The radio was on, turned down to where it was barely more than a suggestion of music. Imani was at the counter, with her socks on. and her back to the room and her arms slightly away from her sides and her hips moving in the small, private, self-contained way they had moved for months in this kitchen, while a man stood in the hallway and watched from the dark and told himself it was manageable. Ji-Wook stood in the kitchen doorway. He looked at her. She hadn't heard him yet. He watched her sway for approximately 4 seconds, which was different from 17 nights of watching from a hallway, not in terms of what he felt, but in terms of what he was going to do about it. He walked into the kitchen. She heard him and turned, not startled, not this time. She had been expecting him. Maybe not tonight specifically, maybe not this exact moment, but she had been expecting that at some point he would stop watching from the doorway, and her face when she turned reflected this, open, present. A small private smile at the corner of her mouth that was not for him to manage, but that was clearly for him. He stopped in front of her. He held out his hand. She looked at it. Him. At the Korean Mafia Boss, who had built an empire on precision and control, and had spent 17 nights standing in the dark, watching her dance, because it was the only thing that made the grief quiet, a sound that sat twint, and who had sat in a private room and put everything he held on the table to protect her, and who had crouched down to his daughter's level and given her the truth and stayed beside her in the garden for as long as she wanted. She looked at his hand, she took it. He pulled her into the space where the light was warmest, and she came without resistance, without reservation, without the managed distance they had both carried for longer than was reasonable. Her hand was in his, and his other hand was at her back, and they were both slightly too aware of each other to be graceful about it immediately. They moved anyway. Not perfectly. He had not danced since Yi-Rin, and his timing was off in the first few seconds, and he stepped on her foot once, which she noted with a look but did not comment on verbally. And she laughed, the real laugh, and he felt it move through the point where her hand held his. They found the rhythm. It wasn't the graceful, solitary thing she did. Alone it was different, adjusted. Two people negotiating the same space with the particular, good-natured imprecision of the beginning of something, where the mechanics are still being worked out, but the willingness is not in question. The radio played something low and unhurried, and the kitchen light was exactly the same as it had always been, and outside the coast mist had come in off the Pacific the way it did most nights in October, softening the edges of everything, making the world beyond the windows a gentle and specific blur. Sena slept upstairs. The perimeter was clear. Mujin's team had run the 9 o'clock circuit and everything was quiet and stable and real. Park Row was in custody, and the Busan audit was ongoing, and the work of understanding what the machinery had cost would continue for months. And Ji-Wook would look at every file and carry every accounting, because that was the only version of going forward that respected what the looking would reveal. Do-won was gone from his position, and the men who had come through the drainage easement were out of the city, and the territorial arrangement held in the way that things hold when the consequences of breaking them are understood by everyone who matters. And Yi-Rin would always be the person she was, and the loss would always be the shape it was, and Sena would carry her mother through every version of herself she became, which was not grief in the diminishing sense, but grief in the living sense, the kind Imani's mother had described in their kitchen at midnight, sadness that moves through the body and finds somewhere to go. Ji-Wook held Imani's hand and moved with her in the warm kitchen light and did not think about any of this specifically. He was here, in this room, with this woman, and the stone in his chest was not gone, would not be gone, but its edges had changed again. Changed in a direction he had not expected, and had not planned for, and had arrived at by standing in a dark hallway, watching someone dance, and being seen in the one moment he forgot to manage his own expression. "You still stepped on my foot," Imani said quietly. "I know, I'm noting it." Noted. She adjusted her hand in his, and they kept moving. The house that had been a monument to everything. Ji-Wook had lost settled around them in the night, warm and imperfect, and full of the particular ongoing life of people who have decided, consciously and with clear eyes, to be present for each other. No shadows in the hallway, no distance manufactured to stay safe. Just two people who had each learned the weight of carrying grief alone, who had found each other in the middle of the night in a kitchen, who had been tested by fire and remained not unchanged, not unmarked, but upright and present, and choosing this dancing together under the same warm light that had always been there, waiting for someone to stop watching from the dark and simply walk in. Imani closed her eyes. She was not dancing alone.